in the chat, though. With all those lines of gift subs.
Russia.
I appreciate it, man. All right. Like I said, this is about the Baltic Fleet.
On the turn of the 20th century, Russia and Japan got into a dispute over who should be in control of Korea and China. Looking to avoid an armed conflict, the Japanese sent the Russians a deal that came with reasonable concessions on both sides. But the Russians didn't like it, they rejected the deal, and they countered with a pretty unreasonable deal that came with lots of concessions for Japan and not so many for Russia. And so Japan rejected that deal, and
I've never learned any of this before.
On the Russian Navy stationed at Fort Arthur in China. This attack would officially start the one-year-long Russo-Japanese War. The Russians knew they would need to send a replacement naval fleet up to Fort Arthur to reclaim it from the Japanese, but unfortunately, the attack at Fort Arthur had totally wiped out all of Russia's best sailors and all their best ships, putting Russia at a major disadvantage.
Yeah, I love it when the gift sub algorithm actually gives subs to people that like I've seen in chat and stuff too.
Emperor, Tsar Nicholas II, authorizes an unbelievable mission. He orders the
Russian bunch of familiar names
to set sail from their harbor in northern Europe and sail 18,000 miles around the world to Japan, where they will defeat the Japanese and then reclaim Fort Arthur. The fact that none of the Baltic Fleet ships were designed to sail that far of a distance, or that there were literally 0 refueling points along their massive projected path.
I can't believe they went that far.
Inconsequential and ignored. What was also considered inconsequential
is it a bit quiet?
Was how absurdly unquiet.
So the Baltic Fleet went from the Baltic Sea all the way around the fucking Horn of Africa, the Cape of Africa, and like into the Indian Ocean to fucking Japan. Insane. Also, Space Taco. Thank you for those gift subs, dude. And Havoc X, thank you for resubbing, man. Thank you guys, appreciate it. Thank you for all the
qualified
support.
The Baltic crew was. The sailors were mostly illiterate peasants that did not grow up on the coasts, and so they showed up for military training with no seafaring skills. And then after their military training, they still had no seafaring skills because the Baltic Fleet's harbor was frozen solid almost year-round. But the Tsar believed the man he had put in charge of this crew, Admiral Rojesvenski, would make up for their deficiencies. And this belief was not unwarranted. Admiral Rojesvenski was the best Russian officer that had not been killed.
Yeah, so it was like a fleet that was like always...
He had significant combat experience, and he had a wickedly bad
in
temper.
frozen water, so they like didn't
if you were doing
get any
something he didn't
practicing
like,
and stuff.
He was going to beat the crap out of you, literally. And when he was told he was going to be in charge of this
Ariel,
fairly inexperienced crew, he was certain his rough style would whip these Baltic boys into shape, and they would be very successful. But when he laid eyes on the Baltic Fleet,
yeah, I feel bad sometimes, so I'll like go to a stream for a second
than he realized.
And get a gift sub. And it's like, how does Twitch decide who to give the subs to?
With the 2 senior officers that were assigned to be his direct support, and he immediately.
But then that could get someone to stick around too, though, at the same time. So
by their nicknames, right to their face. The first one was the manure sack, and the other was a vast empty space. As for the Baltic Fleet's 45 ships, they were terrible. Because this unit never went out on the ocean because their harbor was always frozen, Russia didn't waste their good ships on them. So all they had were really old, obsolete warships and then non-military ships like ferries and yachts they just slapped random guns onto. They also had ships that
Anonymous.
the Baltic Fleet crew enthusiastically called futuristic, which were these ships
who's
that
gifting
came
subs
out of
but didn't have one in his own.
briefly copying French
Thank you so much.
engineering, which involved these crazy top-heavy ships that sat so low in the water that their lowest rung of weapons, their cannons that poked out the windows at the bottom of the ship, they didn't work because they sat under the water permanently. But regardless of their shortfalls, the Baltic Fleet was what Rojesvenski had
1904, 1905.
So he had to just get them moving if they were going to win the war. And so on October 16th, 1904, Admiral Rojesvenski ordered all of his men to take their positions in all of their ships, and they set sail. And immediately, 30 seconds into their
like
trip,
right at the turn of the
lead
century,
ship ran aground, and another ship lost its anchor, even though it should not have been casting its anchor to begin with.
Immediately.
And so while one ship is trying to refloat, and the other is trying to find its anchor in the ocean, a third ship comes along and broadsides a fourth ship. and it does so much damage to this fourth ship, that ship had to go back home. But once they overcame these
scuttle like a bunch of
obstacles,
ships already.
The Baltic fleet that now numbered 44 ships made it out of the harbor without any more issues and then set sail for the narrow waters between Denmark and Sweden. As they drew closer, Manure Sack informed Rojesvenski that there might be an issue, that he had heard rumblings amongst the crew that they believed Japanese torpedo boats were stationed off the coast of Denmark waiting for them to get there. Rojesvenski told Manure Sack that that was impossible. The Japanese torpedo boats did not have the capabilities to sail 18,000 miles to Denmark, and even if they did have the ability to do that, they could not have gotten there in such a short period of time. But Manure Sack told Rojesvenski that unfortunately, even though logically
that's insane,
that makes sense,
the sailors are like, yeah, the Japanese are already in the Baltic Sea.
And so
like,
Rojesvenski began sending out messages to all the other ships, telling them there are no
Japanese
Japanese torpedo
Russia.
boats waiting for us off the coast of Denmark.
They saw
Everybody
like
just needs to calm down. And these messages did appear to work at first, because eventually another rumor began to circulate, one that Rojesvenski was not really aware of as it was happening, and that was that the crew began to believe there was a huge minefield underneath them. Everywhere they went, there was a minefield. And everybody got so worked up about it that it made its way back to a lot of the captains actually piloting the different ships. And at some point, the pilots just began doing these evasive maneuvers. And Rojesvenski's looking around wondering what they're doing, and they began crashing into each other, trying to avoid this minefield. When Rojesvenski finally figured out what was going on, he sent out even more messages telling them that there's no minefield under us. It's totally safe. Everybody just needs to calm down. And so it took
these like giant
going out
boats
on deck and firing shots into the air to finally get people to stop believing they were on top of a minefield. But just a couple of hours later, after Rojesvenski had gone back up to the bridge and was just looking out, surveying his fleet as they carried on towards Denmark and Sweden, when all of a sudden, towards the very front of his fleet, he heard this unbelievable barrage of cannon fire. One of his own ships was engaging something out in front of the fleet, but Rojesvenski was too far away to see what it was, and then a message came through from the attacking ship, whose name was Kamchatka, and they said they were surrounded on all sides by at least 8 Japanese torpedo boats. And so Rojesvenski runs out onto the deck, looking out towards the horizon, expecting to see these 8 Japanese ships, but he doesn't. And then all of a sudden, the shooting just completely stops and it's silent. And then Rojesvenski notices on his right side a small little fishing boat is making its way right up alongside his. It would turn out Kamchatka, the attacking ship, had confused this little unarmed Russian fishing ship with 8 Japanese torpedo boats and had opened fire. But luckily, even though they fired hundreds and hundreds of rounds at this little boat, none of them hit the boat. So the fishermen were fine, and the fishermen had actually been sent to the boat, specifically by Tsar Nicholas II, to tell Rojesvenski that he had been promoted. And so Rojesvenski apologizes to the fishermen for having shot at them hundreds and hundreds of times, and they said it was okay, and the fishermen carried on. After Rojesvenski chewed out the crew of the Kamchatka, the rest of the Baltic fleet gathered up, and they continued to
imagine being on that little boat. You're like, Jesus fucking Christ.
When they got close, a Danish resupply ship came out to meet them to give them fuel and food and water, and the Baltic fleet mistook them for a Japanese torpedo boat, causing them to ram them repeatedly. And then they realized their mistake, but at that point, they had done severe damage.
I'd love to see like a video of that.
Who had to immediately turn around and go back to shore. After that, the Baltic fleet did manage to get past Denmark and Sweden, and they made it out to the North Sea. But as soon as they got out there was trouble. One of the captains of the ships that was towards the front of the Baltic fleet's formation spotted 4 Japanese torpedo boats coming right at them. And so this ship, along with 6 others, immediately just began engaging these 4 ships with everything they had. Cannons, big guns, small guns, everything. It was absolute chaos from the front of this formation. And the amount of gunfire that was going off towards the front caused the rest of the ships that were not part of the attack to begin to panic. and the other ship captains began ramming into each other to try to get away from this attack.
The boats all ramming into each other is hilarious.
Crew members on all the ships begin drawing their swords and running around expecting the Japanese to board them at any moment. And the others that did not draw their swords put on life jackets and laid down on their back on the deck of the ship, believing that was procedure for how to survive a sinking ship. And so for the next 20 minutes, it was just continuous gunfire coming from the front of their formation. One of the attacking ships sent a message back to Rojestvenski that said they had been hit by a torpedo and they were taking heavy fire and it was just absolute bedlam up there. And then all of a sudden, it just totally stopped. And when the smoke cleared, Rojestvenski and his ship had been able to maneuver up a little bit closer and they could see what they were shooting at. And it would turn out, once again, it was a case of mistaken identity.
It is like a Monty Python sketch.
Japanese torpedo boats.
Like, no fucking joke.
4 small British fishing boats. And in the chaos of the gunfight, the Baltic fleet had inadvertently begun to fire at each other, killing several crew members and badly damaging their own guys in the process. As for the British fishermen, only one of their boats actually sunk, despite the fact that the Baltic fleet had fired thousands and thousands of rounds at them, and they had been stationary the entire time. The Russian Tsar immediately apologized to Britain, but the British media went crazy and the British people called for war, believing that this type of attack could not possibly be an accident.
Right?
The Russian diplomats leveled with the British and said, no, this really was an accident. And eventually
they're just idiots. I'm sorry.
Starting yet
no, they're
war.
just really stupid.
And his Baltic fleet were allowed to continue in their journey, and after a couple of weeks, they were getting close to Africa when one of his ships, the Kamchatka, the same ship that believed they were surrounded by 8 Japanese torpedo boats, they got separated from the main fleet and got lost. And so
they got lost.
And the other officers did what they could to try to locate them, but nobody had seen where they went, and there wasn't great technology to try to locate them. And so unfortunately, Rojestvenski and the Baltic fleet just had to continue on and hope that at some point the lost ship would find them again. A few days later, the main body arrived in Tangier, and lo and behold, Kamchatka showed up, and they informed—
Where's Tangier? Is that South Africa, or is that Madagascar? Oh, it's Morocco. So they're not even that far at all. They're just barely past the Straits of Gibraltar.
Rojestvenski that they had gotten lost, and they didn't really have a good answer for that. But once they were lost, they managed to engage 3 separate Japanese torpedo boats.
Sure.
But it would turn out they were not Japanese torpedo boats. They were, in fact, a German, a Swedish, and a French fishing boat. But none of Kamchatka's rounds actually impacted any of the 3 vessels, and so 3 more wars were averted. And so now that Rojestvenski had his lost ship back, he gathered up his full Baltic fleet, and they left Tangier. But on their way out, one of the ships managed to cut the underwater telegraph line to Tangier, cutting off Tangier's communication with Europe for the next 4 days. By now, the Baltic fleet was very low on coal, but they had a planned rendezvous with a German resupply ship off the coast of West Africa. When they got there, the crew decided they didn't want to do another resupply later on, and so let's just take double coal this time. And so they hauled all this extra coal onto their ships, despite not having a place for it, and so naturally they began throwing it in the halls and in their bedrooms.
What the fuck?
Anywhere there was space. And what that did is it led to a fine layer of coal dust all over everything in the ship. And that, combined with the intense humidity off the coast of Africa, led to this black coal gunk getting trapped inside of all of the sailors' lungs, which began killing several of them. A couple weeks later, as they rounded the southern tip of Africa,
there's a Russian-Japanese war that's happening. They're going to Japan.
Coal dust on their ships, which was a big relief. But the rain turned into a pretty bad storm.
They're going all the way around Africa and stuff.
Decided he just wanted all of his ships.
That's the only way to go, really.
And say they were okay. And so one by one, each of the ships were told to message him saying the words, "We are okay." And so one by one, each of the ships did this until it got to Kamchatka's turn. And they accidentally sent the message, "Do you see Japanese torpedo boats?" And of course, this message spread like wildfire across the entire crew, which led to mass hysteria, and Rojestvenski's trying to send out messages to say, no, there's no Japanese torpedo boats, but it's too late. The other captains are panicking, and they're ramming into each other and firing blindly into the wind. From that point forward, every night, Rojestvenski would go up onto the bow of his ship, and he would scream obscenities at Kamchatka. When the Baltic fleet finally made it to Madagascar, the morale amongst the crew was very low. And so when
This
they
is the best
docked
part.
in
This is the best
Madagascar,
part.
the crew decided it would be a good idea to boost their morale by buying some pets to bring back on board the ship with them.
They buy
And the
pets.
pets they decided to bring back were crocodiles and poisonous snakes. When their handlers smuggled them back on board their ship, they immediately escaped down into the bowels of the ship. When they went looking for them, they couldn't find them because the ships were in such bad shape. There were all sorts of cracks and holes all over the interior for these animals to escape to. And so the men just had to accept there were very dangerous predators just living on their ship with them. And so most
Yeah, we
men
got
were
snakes on
unable
the
to
ship
sleep
now.
at night in fear of being attacked by these animals, which led a number of them to go for real insane. And so the pets idea didn't really boost morale amongst the Baltic fleet, and so one of the officers decided he would take another crack at boosting spirits. And so he went to a vendor
Interior
in Madagascar.
crocodile alligator.
He purchased 2,000 of their finest cigarettes to bring back on board. So he brings them back on board, he hands them all out, and everyone's so thankful. But it turns out those cigarettes were laced with enormous amounts of opium, which led to hundreds of the crew members becoming hopelessly addicted to opium. Also in Madagascar, the sailors picked up dozens of diseases that began wiping them out in droves. During one funeral for a crew member, the Kamchatka asked if they could fire a salute with blank rounds. They were given permission, but they accidentally fired live rounds into the ship right next to them.
Oh my God.
And the rest of the Baltic fleet finally left Madagascar. Their only refrigerator on board one of their ships broke, which spoiled all of their meat, tons and tons of meat. And so they began throwing it overboard, which attracted hundreds and hundreds of sharks, which circled their ships for the rest of their journey. Rojesvenski desperately wanted to find a way to somehow train the remainder of the Baltic fleet how to be somewhat militarily competent. And so he decided he would make them all do target practice because that had been a big issue on this trip so far.
Oh my
and so he had
God.
one ship attach a long line that was connected to a target in the water, and that ship would pull the target along, and the other ships would take shots at the target. And so all of the ships on Rojesvenski's call began firing at this target, and after thousands and thousands of rounds, they didn't hit the target once. However, they managed to continuously shoot the ship that was pulling the target. For Rojesvenski, this was the final straw. He felt like he could do absolutely
They just shot the shit
nothing
out of the
to
ship.
make the Baltic fleet an actual military force. And so he sent a message back to the Tsar and said, "You got to replace me. I need to resign and somebody else needs to come in and take over." And the Tsar said, "No. This is your fleet." And so begrudgingly, Rojesvenski continued on leading the Baltic fleet until they finally, after 7 total months
just
on
like,
the
nope.
sea, were within striking distance of their target in Japan. The night before, as they prepared for their attack, they went into stealth mode where all the ships killed all of their lights. They're
Oh
totally
my
dark,
God.
with the exception of their hospital ship. That kept their lights on. This was considered a rule of war at the time, which both sides abided by. And so while the Baltic fleet was sitting out in the waters outside of Japan, a small fishing boat began coming towards them. Now, the fishing boat could only see the lit-up hospital ship. They could not see the 43 other darkened ships. And so a crew member on board this hospital ship came up to the railing, and he recognized the fishing boat was actually a Russian fishing boat. And so he waved them down, and when the Russian fishermen came outside, the crew member told him, "You gotta stop, because there's 43 ships behind me that have their lights off. Do not go this way, go around." And so the Russian fisherman thanked him and turned around and went on his merry way. Except that wasn't a Russian fisherman, it was a Japanese sailor on board a Japanese torpedo boat. And now they knew exactly where the Baltic fleet was. And so that night, the Japanese Navy completely surrounded the Baltic fleet, and then the next day at daybreak, they launched their attack. It was called the Battle of Tsushima, and it was obscenely lopsided. The Japanese Navy completely wiped out the Baltic fleet, killing 4,000 of their crew members and capturing 7,300 others, which included
Like a fucking
Rojesvenski, who was
completely
badly wounded
destroyed.
in the battle, but he would survive. In contrast, the Japanese only had 100 casualties. This victory for Japan really marked the end of the war for Russia, and shortly after the Battle of Tsushima, the Russians agreed to surrender. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode,
Yeah, that's a good one. I love that story so much. It does need to be a movie. There's a link to it. His name's Mr. Ballin, the channel. Most of his videos are not funny like that, though. They're actually like some fucked up ones. But that one's probably the funniest one I've seen. Yeah, I've never heard that story before. What a fucking disaster. And yeah, it's like a fucking, like they were like, yeah, let's get pets. Like, I don't understand. They buy fucking alligators and snakes and shit. Yeah, and then like the sharks just following them, and this is the link to that video. Let's watch. Trying to find another good one of his that I have watched recently. A lot of them are just true crime, and they don't have good endings too. So I don't watch too much of that. This one is kind of. I think this one's.
I read a lot of scary stories, but today's top story legitimately freaked me out. But before I get into today's story, in 1982, a very outdoorsy teenage girl and boy who had recently started dating decided to go camping in Maine. Around 1 a.m. on the first night they were there, the girl wakes up because she has to go to the bathroom, and she's about to unzip her tent when she stops because she hears some strange noises coming from outside their tent. It wasn't that loud, but it sounded
that tent is
distinctly
sick.
like something was digging in the ground. But she really had to go, and she figured, you know what, it's probably just some small animal or something. And so she begins to unzip the tent. And there's a little bit of moonlight that night, and there was a clearing outside of their tent. So the moonlight's pouring through.
Did he have one about May Island?
And so she looks through this tiny hole, and she can't believe what she sees. It is a grown woman squatting down about 2 or 3 feet away from their tent. Her back is to them, so she can't see that she's looking through the tent. And she's feverishly digging into the ground in front of her. The girl literally falls backwards into her tent. She's so startled by what she sees. And she lands on her boyfriend, who immediately gets up and he's like, what's going on? And she goes, shh. And she points at the little hole where she had unzipped the tent, and she goes, look. The boy is confused, but he can tell his girlfriend is very serious. So he sits up quietly and he looks through the little opening in the door and he sees the digging woman. The boy recoils and looks at his girlfriend and he's like, what is going on out there? He takes a flashlight and she's telling him, don't do it. And he opens up the tent a little bit more and he aims his flashlight directly on this woman. And this gets her attention and she stops digging and she stands up slowly and she turns around and faces them and she's got no expression. She's not giving them any indication why she's there. She's not acting aggressive. She's not acting scared. She's just completely neutral. And she stands there staring at them for quite a while before turning around and just walking away from their campsite. And after a little while, when they were pretty certain she was gone,
oh yeah, I've seen that video.
They open their tent all the way. They go outside.
Down the rabbit hole
they
one.
Scan around with their flashlights, and she's nowhere to be found. And they go to where she was digging, and it's just this weird 4-inch deep hole in the ground. There's no rhyme or reason to why she was doing that. And so after sitting there wondering what they should do, they settled on, well, tomorrow we'll tell the park rangers that she was here, and maybe they'll do something about it. And so feeling pretty confident that this woman's not going to come back.
Yeah, I think
they
drugs
both go back
too.
into the tent, they zip it shut.
Sounds like a tweaker or something.
They're about to go to sleep when they hear someone running towards their campsite, and they know it's this woman. They immediately unzip the tent and they look out.
That's a weird
now
picture.
The woman's not digging anymore. She's rummaging through some of their stuff that's outside of their tent. And the way she's doing it, they described as monkey-like. She'd pick something up, look at it, and throw it over her head. She'd pick the next thing up, throw it over her head, back and forth, just throwing things behind her. And so the boy gets out and he shines a light on her and goes, you need to leave. And she doesn't react. She just keeps flipping through all their stuff until he gets pretty forceful and says, you need to leave right now. And at that point, she kind of stops and looks at him like, huh, What are you doing here? And then she gets up, turns around, and walks away. Now the couple really doesn't know what to do because she's clearly willing to come back after being confronted. But they stayed outside their tent for about 15 more minutes, shining their light and making lots of noise and treating her like she's an animal. And they're just trying to scare her away from the campsite. And after a little bit of time, they thought, okay, there's no way she comes back now because, you know, we were pretty aggressive with her this time and she seemed to really get it. They both do go back in the tent, and as soon as they zip it shut, they hear her come running.
Oh yeah, they weren't
back
submarines
like
in that last story. They were torpedo boats, so they're just boats that like could shoot torpedoes. I think that was.
This time she runs back to the.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Not like actual submarines. I could be wrong.
As fast as she can, and this time they come out of their tent and they're mad and they are screaming at this woman to get the F out of here. What are you doing? And this seems to kind of frighten the woman, who gets up and she looks at them like, why are you yelling at me? And she runs away, and it looked almost animalistic the way she was running away, like she was feral. The boy and the girl are totally shaken up at this point. It's about 1:30 in the morning, and this woman just keeps coming back to their site, and they don't know what to do about it, so they turn on some lanterns, and they turn on their flashlights, and they decide, we're just gonna stay outside until the morning. That way we know she doesn't come back and doesn't steal anything from us. But by about 3:30 in the morning, they've been outside for 2 hours, they're getting cold, they're super tired, the woman's nowhere to be found, and so they finally say, you want to go back in and get some sleep? I think this time she's really gone. They get back in their sleeping bags and they go to sleep. They don't hear her again. The next morning when they get up and they unzip their tent, they look outside and all of their stuff has been thrown all over the campsite. And the hole in the ground that the woman had dug that was previously about 4 or 6 inches deep is now well over a foot deep. And they realize this woman must have been lurking in the shadows in the woods, watching them from 1:30 to 3:30 in the morning. That whole time they were out there kind of warding her off. She was just waiting, just watching them the whole time in the shadows. And as soon as they went into their tent, she must have given it a little bit of time, but then she ran right back over and she ransacked their site. But the strangest thing was, after they looked through all of the stuff she had chucked around,
what if they found like gold under their tent or something like that? That'd be pretty sick.
Out that she could have taken but didn't. After they picked up their site, they went to the park ranger and they told them about what had happened. But the ranger has no idea what to make of it. He's never heard of such a thing. And so the couple just leaves that day because they're not about to spend another night here. And to this day, they have no idea why this woman was running onto their site and digging into the ground and rummaging through their stuff. It was like she was just a wild animal. In 2015, an experienced outdoorsman named Bob, along with his wife, his young daughter, and
Bob the outdoorsman,
decided to go camping in a remote part of northern Oregon. When they arrived at the site, Bob began setting up the big family tent for everyone to sleep in, and his daughter said, hey, do you mind if I sleep in the spare 2-man tent that we always bring with us? Bob and his wife deliberated for a minute, but said, you know what, that's fine, but you gotta bring Guts. That's one of the German Shepherds. Guts needs to sleep
Guts,
with you
the fucking German Shepherd. That's
so
sick.
That night, after some s'mores around a campfire, Bob's daughter, along with Guts, retreat to their 2-man tent, and Bob, his wife, and Leah, the other dog, retreat to their tent. That night, Bob wakes
the outdoorsman, watching fucking Berserker.
His tent. And he looks to his side, and his wife is still in the tent with him, and so is Leah, the other dog. And he listens really closely, and he can hear his daughter is snoring, and he can hear the sound of Guts breathing. So his whole family is accounted for, but he still hears these footsteps.
You got a desert.
And they don't sound like light little scampering sounds like you might expect from a squirrel or some small critter. They sound heavy, like a big creature is roaming around their campsite. But Bob's dogs are really keyed in to protecting their family, and since Guts and Leah are not up going crazy about whatever's out there, he figures, you know what, it's gotta be an elk or something, and it's not gonna do anything to us, so Bob ultimately just goes back to sleep. The next morning, Bob gets up, and everybody's just fine. There's no sign of any intruders in their campsite, and so that only confirms to him that, yep, it was just some harmless animal kind of walking around the wilderness, because we're in a pretty remote area. That morning, they decide to go for a walk down the road that was right next to their campsite. And so they take the dogs, they start walking, and they make it a couple hundred feet down this road when all of a sudden Guts sees something or hears something and takes off sprinting down the road and turns down this little access road that branches off of the road they're on into the woods. And Bob is thinking, oh no, there's a campsite down there and this big German Shepherd's gonna bound up on them and something bad's gonna happen. And so Bob, his heart's racing, he starts taking off after Guts. He goes down the access road and he finds Guts stopped right outside of a campsite. But there doesn't appear to be anybody in the campsite. But there's a tent, there's a cooler, there's a table, there's all the things you would expect at a campsite, just no people.
Do you have
so Bob runs up and he grabs Guts and he yells out reflexively, "Hey, I'm really sorry. He's totally harmless. I don't know what he saw. Hey, we're leaving." But then before he leaves, he realizes on the tent, there's this big scratch through it, like it's been cut open. And curiosity gets the better of him. And so he kind of walks up, keeping an eye out in case he's wrong and there are people still here. But as he gets closer, he realizes there's definitely no one here. This site is abandoned. Because he's looking around and all of their stuff has just been ransacked. There's scratch marks on everything, like animals have clearly come through here. And Bob, who is an avid outdoorsman, he knows how much some of their equipment cost. And he's thinking, why would anyone abandon this really expensive tent or this really expensive cooler? And as he's thinking about that, he turns.
Your dog is crazy.
A propane tank, a solid metal propane tank that has been completely flattened. But there's no tree that's fallen nearby. There's no source. There's no way that could have been flattened. So he's definitely unsettled by this, but ultimately he decides, you know what? I'm gonna take my family, go back to my campsite. I'll just call the park rangers. They can come down here and they can figure out what this is. Later that afternoon, Bob and his family are back at their campsite just a couple 100 feet away from this abandoned campsite. And at one point, his wife gets up to go use the bathroom. She walks about 70 feet away behind a tree and she squats down. And then all of a sudden, she gets up and starts running back towards camp. And Bob sees this. He turns and sees her running towards him. At the same time, Guts gets up and starts sprinting towards her. And so Bob's thinking, what the heck is going on? Bob turns to his daughter and says, "Stay right here with Leah." And Bob gets up and starts running towards his wife. And Guts, at this point, has run to his wife and past his wife. Guts has run way into the woods. And as Bob is running up to his wife, he's like, "What's going on? Why are you running? What's going on?" And she says, "I don't know. I just had this horrible feeling someone was watching me. And when I turned, I already saw Guts running towards me and it scared me. And so that's why I'm here."
Do you have him?
Go with our daughter and with Leah. I'm going to see what's going on. And so his wife leaves and Bob draws his pistol and he starts walking out towards where Guts.
Yeah, he's definitely like my new favorite.
Hair raised, growling, it's yapping,
story
and barking
time kind of person.
Something in front of it. And Bob's looking and he can't see anything. And finally, after not being able to figure out what the heck is going on, he just takes Guts and goes back to his campsite. When Bob got back to his campsite, he wanted to leave. And his wife wanted to leave. His daughter didn't really know what was going on, but the attitude was, we want to leave. However, it was getting late and they had a bunch of stuff they would need to pack up. And it was going to be a real ordeal trying to do that, especially without any
the editing is funny
so they decide,
sometimes.
okay, we'll stay one more day and we're going to leave first thing in the morning.
A
In
lot
Bob's head, he's thinking, okay, I heard weird footsteps
like
outside.
random Google.
There's an abandoned campsite nearby.
Man in woods. You know what I mean?
Propane tank. And now my wife is running away from something. And
irritated man in
strange
woods.
Things in the woods. Like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And he decides he's going to set up a tripwire all the way around his campsite using a rope tied at about 8 inches off the ground, where along the rope would be little pieces of metal that would clang together. So if anything touched the rope, it would make the metallic sound, then it would alert Bob that someone's here. And so Bob goes over to the edge of the site where there's an obvious starting point for this tripwire, and he bends down to tie the rope, and he realizes, oh my God, someone's already done this. There is another tripwire.
Of course Bob is drinking Monster fucking Zero.
Outside of our campsite. It's just been cut, it's been broken. Like it doesn't work, but it's here. Someone else who was at this campsite felt concerned enough about whatever was in the woods that they already had this idea. Bob didn't even tie his perimeter. He just drew his gun, told his family, get in the truck.
Also, Dragon Ball, thank you for the raid, dude.
Protecting his family in the truck.
We're doing well.
As soon as the sun came up, they packed up and they got the heck out of there. Bob is convinced that there is something out there in the woods in northern Oregon that was walking around their campsite at night, that's scaring their dogs, that's stalking them, basically, and watching them from a distance. And probably whatever is out in the woods is the same thing that caused the previous group to set up their own tripwire. And it's also probably the reason the other campers at the other campsite were willing to abandon their nice equipment to get the heck out of there, because they are not messing with whatever the heck is out in those woods.
The witch.
In 2004, wildland firefighters were called into a forest in central Idaho to combat an emerging fire.
I've never heard a story from Idaho, I think.
Forest, it was clear this fire was spreading a lot faster than they anticipated.
All I know is potatoes.
As a result, Mike, who was the assistant superintendent, basically the second in command of this particular crew, he said he was going to hop on the ATV and drive off way ahead of them to see if they needed to spread out
the ghost potato.
Fire. So Mike hops on an
Ghost
ATV
Tater.
and he takes off down this ancient
Story of the
logging
haunted
road
tater.
that probably hasn't seen a vehicle or a person in decades. Mike had made it about a half mile down this trail when he noticed out of the corner of his eye a bobcat was running perpendicular to him straight out of the forest as if it was going to cross the road about 100 feet in front of him. Mike comes to a stop and thinks, this bobcat doesn't know I'm here. It probably is not used to seeing people. It's going to come out into this trail, see me, get spooked, and run away. But instead, this bobcat runs directly into the middle of the road, turns, and faces Mike in a very aggressive posture. Mike is shocked at what he's seeing.
Very aggressive
bobcats
posture.
are notoriously elusive and they're nocturnal. So for this thing to be out in the daytime and to be intentionally blocking his path and standing there aggressively like it's going to attack him was so out of the ordinary. So the two of them are just looking at each other, not moving for about 10 seconds until this bobcat opens its mouth and then begins screaming like a person. It did not seem like the right sound for what he was looking at. He said,
I mean,
more
bobcats
than
make
scary, it
weird
was just
sounds, dude.
intensely weird. And just as quickly as this bobcat has arrived, it stops screaming, turns and runs to a tree, sprints up the tree and climbs onto this branch that happens to be perched right over
A lot of
the trail
animals
he's
make
on.
some
And Mike's
fucking
looking up
scary
at this
noises you
bobcat
wouldn't
that's
expect.
right over this trail, and he knows if I'm going to continue going down
Box
this trail, I have
noise
to
is
go
really
under
weird.
this screaming bobcat. Although totally freaked out, he knew he needed to keep going down this trail, and he's thinking to himself, you know what, this bobcat is probably just scared of me, and that was its reaction, as bizarre as it was. And so he throws his ATV in gear, and he starts slowly moving down the trail, the whole time keeping his eye on the bobcat, making sure it doesn't show any sign like it's going to leap off onto him. And as he got closer and closer, he just gunned it and sped underneath the branch, and luckily it didn't jump down on him. And as he got a little bit farther away, he turned up to look, and the bobcat had turned around and was still watching him very intently sitting on this branch. Mike makes it about another half mile down the road before he sees something else that's very strange. He sees a cabin. It's this little tiny cabin that's tucked away in the woods, and he's thinking to himself, I'm on federal land. There aren't supposed to be any private structures here. And he figures, even if this is illegal,
looked like
I
a
do need to
Goosebumps
stop
cabin.
and make sure no one's in there because there's this huge fire coming this way. And so he parks his ATV and he starts walking off the trail towards this cabin. And as he gets closer, he can tell it's not only a very old cabin, but it's almost certainly abandoned because he can see all these slats that have been put over all of the windows, like it's been boarded up. But when he got up close, he noticed something strange. The door itself into this cabin was not boarded up, and the doorknob was missing, and in its place was this shiny silver chain link that was thread through the opening where there should have been a doorknob around a wooden post that was right outside the door. Basically a makeshift lock because there was no doorknob to it. And he's thinking how weird it is that in the middle of this forest, on an old ancient logging road that clearly no one goes down, where bobcats are running around freely, that there would be this new chain here, which indicates someone must have been here recently. And so he bends down to look.
Yeah, especially like a logging
still
road.
there from where the doorknob.
Definitely like where
looks
people
inside,
bring people to kill
he can't
them.
really see anything. And so he takes his flashlight and he shines it in, and he can't
Like
believe what
access
he's looking
roads
at.
to logging
There's all
roads.
this furniture inside this tiny little cabin in the middle of nowhere.
Not a good
and
place
it's
to
all
be.
upside down, and he's just totally creeped out. So he puts his flashlight away and kind of backs up, and he starts walking back towards the road, and he can't help it, but the whole time he's looking over his shoulder back at the
cabin in the
Someone's
woods.
gonna emerge from outside of this cabin. He gets to the road, and by the time he's there, he's running. He jumps on his ATV, he whips it around, and he starts blazing back up the logging road back towards his crew. And when he turns the corner to where that bobcat was, he sees there is now a Native American woman standing in the middle of the path. She's wearing this tattered white nightgown, she's barefoot, and she's standing in the same spot he saw
Damn,
that
girl.
bobcat. And she's looking at him as if she's expecting him, like she's been tipped off that he's gonna be here. And he stops about 100 feet away from her, and now he's officially freaked out. He's still looking over his shoulder towards that cabin, because now everything is just totally weird to him. And before he has a chance to do anything, this woman lets out a scream, a blood-curdling scream that is identical to the bobcat's scream. And so Mike is totally unnerved by this. Everything about this day has really gone sideways as this woman is screaming at the top of her lungs, and then suddenly she stops. Mike's still just standing there like, what's going on? And she runs to the same tree the bobcat had climbed earlier, and she climbs up this tree and gets onto the branch where the bobcat was and perches like an animal on the branch looking at Mike. And now, just like the bobcat, Mike is going to have to drive right underneath this woman who was perched over the trail. And so he throws his ATV in gear and he starts driving and he's staring at this woman, and now her mouth is just open like she's about to scream again. And as soon as he got close, he gunned it and went right underneath her. And he turned around after he got some distance away from her, and she's still on the branch, now turned around facing him as he
Isn't Bobcat Girl an actual superhero?
He tells the crew what he saw, and as much as they all want to go back and see this woman and see this cabin, they know they can't
like the boys or something.
And so ultimately they do that and then they leave. A couple of days later, Mike was in a bar in the town right near the forest they had just been in fighting that fire, and Mike had seen the woman in the cabin, and he struck up a conversation with a local. And he said, hey, do you know of any buildings that are in that section of the forest? And the guy kind of laughed and he was like, you know, the only building I ever heard of out there was apparently some cabin where some crazy lady thought of herself as a witch, and she apparently had a bobcat for a pet. And so we as kids were just told to stay away from there. So besides that, I don't know. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of today's.
It's a bobcat. Thanks for linking that, Bowsersaurus.
Stories, and I will pin the best.
All right. Here's another one that's really... There's a couple forest ones like that that I really liked. There's another story that was really good that I just thought of too. Kind of like he was like barking. He was like barking. Cat bark. Name of that one. See, the problem is all the names of these videos. Some of the forest ones were all like very similar sounding, the titles. I don't remember which one's which. Is it?
Every year, hundreds.
Every year. Yep, this is it.
In 1989, 22-year-old Eloise Lindsay was a fresh college graduate.
In 1989.
She was at a crossroads in her life, because even though she just earned her degree, she really didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. And because she was an experienced backpacker...
This one I heard when I was falling asleep the other night, and actually...
get her life together would be to go on a sort of retreat. Go
Kept
out
me
into
up for
the
a little
woods,
while
go out
longer.
into nature, and kind of find herself. So she had planned this very detailed 43.3-mile hike along the Appalachian Trail, starting in South Carolina, where the first 7 days of the hike she would be totally on her own, and then at the 7-day mark she would meet up with a friend at a particular rendezvous point. Her friend would give her resupplies and would be her companion for the rest of the hike. When Eloise told her parents what her plans were, they were not concerned for her safety because she was an experienced backpacker. She had made trips like this before. And so they said, great, we'll see you when you get back. So on November 4th, Eloise sets out to begin her journey down the Appalachian Trail.
I've heard so many fucking weird stories about the Appalachian Trail.
Beautiful, the scenery was amazing, and she had all this.
Like I've been on like a tiny piece of it before, but the whole thing.
Internal and think hard
some really
about what
weird
she wanted
stories.
to do with her life. But on the third day, when she woke up, she was sleeping inside of a tent she had camped just off the trail. She woke up and she had this intense sense of dread. She couldn't really place where it was coming from, but she knew something was wrong, and she's kind of doing inventory of her life, like, what did I forget? Is there something that I'm just not thinking about right now? But she kind of pushes it aside mentally and thinks, okay, you know what? I'm just going to pack up my campsite here and get hiking, and I'm bound to, you know, come up with what it is that's making me feel this way. So she gets out of her tent and she begins packing up her campsite, and she's looking out, kind of scanning the tree line, not because she was looking for anything, but just because she happened to be looking out. And she could have sworn that she saw a man standing, you know, 30, 40 feet away behind a tree. And she kind of did a double take and was staring at him. It's, you know, it's broad daylight, it's the morning, and they're near a trail. So it isn't like unbelievable that there might be someone near her at that very moment.
The heartbeat scared me.
Double take and she
thought there was someone upstairs for a
this
second,
person
like
was
stomping on the
gone.
ground.
And she stood there for a minute, just kind of looking in the direction of where she had seen this guy, wondering, you know, Is my mind playing tricks on me? Did I really see someone there? You know, why aren't they showing themselves again? If there was someone there, they clearly must have just been looking at me. Why aren't they, you know, poking their heads out again to communicate with me in some way? We're out in the middle of nowhere. We should be talking to each other. But the guy never shows himself again. And so as she's standing there wondering
Natalie, what's her name?
She isn't ready to yell out.
That's the Suicide Forest movie.
A little bit nervous.
That movie sucked.
Yelling out to some stranger in the middle of the woods. But she starts to get this really intense feeling that she's being watched. And it feels an awful lot like the sense of dread she had while she was in the tent. And she's starting to wonder, you know, are my instincts or is my sixth sense picking up that I'm being watched? Like there's some predator out there looking at me right now? And even though she has no way of knowing if that's actually true, she's alone in the middle of the woods. And even though she's experienced, she can't help but feel really vulnerable. And because this guy is just not showing himself again, she feels a little bit threatened. And so she begins to panic and she starts packing up all of her stuff as quickly as she can.
It's kind of weird.
As she can, she takes off down the trail away from that guy she saw in the woods.
Get the hell out of there.
As she was walking down this trail, she couldn't help but think someone was right.
Usually I just pick the
turning around
videos, but
this person or
you're welcome to make recommendations if you want.
Was ever there. But this visceral feeling,
might check it out sometime.
She was being watched. That sense of dread she had, it just was not going away. And so she started walking faster and faster. Before long, she was running, and she's realizing that she's in a section of the Appalachian Trail that's very remote. She's not near civilization. She's not near her next rendezvous point. And so she's thinking to herself, I need to get off this trail. I need to get to a road. I need to get away from here.
Yeah, there's noises. There's like some sound effects.
Were to continue on this trail for
people walking every now and then. Usually it has to do with the story, though.
Night before she was going to reach civilization, or she could take a shortcut because she believed there was a road that was running parallel to her trail, but it was way down the mountain. It would require leaving the trail and basically cutting through the wilderness to get down to this road, but she was pretty confident it was right down there.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to go down that way.
Of this person following her was so intense for her.
Oh, Aisha, thanks for the raid.
To leave the trail. She couldn't stand.
We're just chilling, watching some spooky videos.
Spend another night.
What's going on, everybody?
In the woods with this person stalking her, and so she walks up the trail and starts running down the mountain. It wasn't long before she started to hear audible sounds
pretty late for you.
From what she believed to be this person that was following her. And she would turn around and there'd be no one there. And then she started to walk, you know, trying to listen as she's walking, and she would hear footsteps far away from her, and she'd turn and there'd be nobody there, but she was certain.
Yeah, we're playing some spooky games.
Was following her, someone was stalking her.
And I got tired, so we're just watching spooky videos now.
This animal, whatever it was, they sounded like, you know, a deep male voice, but you couldn't recognize if it was a language of some kind. It just sounded more like a grunt or a yell of some kind. And so her heart rate's elevated, she's panicking, and she's walking as fast as she can just through the middle of the wilderness, hoping she's walking towards this road. But after walking,
it's a story about a woman who went for like a hike on the Appalachian Trail.
Come to a road. It's now completely
she's starting to like
she knows she's lost.
Think someone's following her.
She has to set up camp in the middle of nowhere, and she knows somewhere out in the middle of the woods is some person or something that is stalking me. And she's all alone. She has no way to contact anyone. She doesn't have a cell phone. It's 1989. And so she sets up her campsite and she gets in her tent. She zips it up and she lays.
Would they have had cell phones then? No.
Sounds, and sure enough, within minutes of being inside of that tent, she starts hearing those audible sounds coming from somewhere in the forest. And she hears what sounds like heavy footsteps walking around the perimeter of her campsite.
Also, Law Dog.
All night long, she hears.
Thank you for the sub, dude.
Luckily, they don't come up right to her tent, so there's some separation between her and whatever is making these sounds. And then finally, you know, the sun comes up. She is out of that tent, packs it up, and continues running in the direction she hopes is the road. And of course, all day long, she has that sense that someone is watching her. She's hearing footsteps coming from behind her. She would turn. She doesn't see anything. She would hear that audible grunting sound, that low voice coming from somewhere behind her. But again, she would never see whoever it was or whatever it was that was making the sound. And then again, the sun is starting to set, and she has not found the road. She hasn't found a trail, and she's thinking to herself, I can't even backtrack, because if I turn around and start walking backwards, I'm bound to run into this very thing I'm trying to escape. And so once again,
she's playing some Alien Isolation.
She gets inside, and as soon as she's laying in her tent, she starts hearing those heavy footsteps somewhere out in the woods, kind of walking around the perimeter of her campsite. She's hearing that
Alien Isolation.
low, audible sound that she can't quite place. And at some point, she falls asleep. She
watch you stream for 15 hours?
Jumps out of her tent, packs it up, and starts running. Hopefully, in the direction that will bring her to civilization. A couple days later, when Eloise was supposed to meet her friend on the trail at the 7-day mark, and they were gonna finish the hike together, well, Eloise doesn't show up. But after several hours, when Eloise did not show up, her friend left the trail and contacted authorities and filed a missing person report. And the police would launch this massive search for Eloise along the stretch of the Appalachian Trail where she had said she would be. And for the next 14 days, hundreds of police and volunteers and helicopters are scouring this area, and there's no sign of
helicopter
Eloise.
sounds.
And so after 14 days from the time her friend filed the missing person report, the police had to turn the search off, and they say, look, we can't find her. 2 days after the search was terminated, so 23 days after Eloise had initially set off for her trek through the Appalachian Trail, a hunter that was out in the middle of nowhere near the Appalachian Trail discovers Eloise perched up against a tree. She's totally emaciated, she's dehydrated, she's delirious.
That's insane. They found her 23 days into the search.
The hunter, because she
like they gave up the search.
The hunter was this person that had been following her. But when she realized he was there to help, she went with him. She was brought back and brought to a hospital, and she was checked out. And besides being dehydrated and, emaciated, she was okay. And she would detail in multiple interviews and in her official statement that she had been chased for the past almost 3 weeks in the middle of the woods, and she doesn't know who it was or why they were chasing her. And then interestingly, she said right before she was found, so a couple of days before this hunter finds her, this person, this thing, whatever it was that was following her, got so close to her a couple different times that she was so scared she ditched
some hunter ASMR
that contained all of her life-saving equipment, like her sleeping bag and her tent, and it had some food and water in there. She ditched that.
Oh, is there a new nuke?
Later, so she could run faster away from this thing that is chasing her in the woods. So you got to figure, you got to be at such a high level of fear that you're prepared to ditch the one thing you really require to survive out in the wilderness, which was her pack full of supplies. And then after she's ditched her pack and she's run for some distance, she's got no supplies, no food, no water, she stumbles across this tree in the middle of nowhere that wedged inside the trunk is a cache of donuts and pound cake. And so she takes the donuts and pound cake, and between that and the stream water she had found, that's what kept her alive for the last few days before she was found. Eloise says she has no idea what to make of her experience, and law enforcement were baffled by it as well. Some people think Eloise had a mental break, and she effectively made this whole situation up. That she really was lost in the woods, but no one was chasing her, and she was just kind of paranoid and running around the wilderness.
That seems like such a bizarre detail to like really make up, though. Like even if your brain did it.
Believe it's possible she could have been stalked by wild men, which are basically people that live out in the mountains that are effectively feral, that live off the land, and they've been known, according to local legend, they've been known to attack park rangers.
Dude, especially like in certain parts of the Appalachian Trail.
Wild men,
that's where all the stills are and stuff.
That's the description of what she was describing. But as of right now, there's no official explanation for what happened to her other than she got lost and was found again.
Bears and gorillas.
On June 7th, 1951, two families from Santa Fe, New Mexico met up at the Santa Fe ski basin to have a picnic together.
Fucking bug right here? What is that?
During the summer months when there's no snow on the ground, the Santa Fe ski basin is a very popular location for hikers because the terrain is very rugged, and if you get up to the top of the basin, there's these incredible views overlooking the valley. But on this day, the two families decided they
I don't know, when I think of New Mexico now, all I can think of is Breaking Bad.
Looking up the mountain. As the parents were setting up the picnic site, the kids started playing together. And that was
but it looks like a
Janet
ant
McGee,
kind of, doesn't
brother
it?
and sister aged 7 and 5 respectively, and Stephen Cross, who was 3 years old. After they finished setting up their picnic site,
think it's
they
the thing, man.
And realized the kids are gone. And they're
The
thinking,
thing.
we just saw them like 2
Yo,
minutes
Tech Mech.
ago, so they can't have gone very far.
Going on,
So they
dude? Thanks for
start
that
looking
Prime
around for
Gaming.
their kids, and they can't find them. They're yelling out for them, and they're starting to get a
Hope
little
you've
bit
been
more
well.
worried. And they start branching out farther and farther, and they realize the only other place they could have gone is up into the woods, which are very steep and very rugged. So they're thinking, well, they can't have gone into the mountains. That would be impossible for these young kids to get very far, and they aren't responding to our calls. It's possible they could have been abducted.
Yeah,
So
he
one of
does
the
put a little
parents
Easter eggs
ran
in. I'm
down
just
to
joking.
The main building of the actual ski resort
Where
where
am
they
I?
kept a staff member in there during the summer months, and they were able to get inside and use a phone, and they called authorities. So the police come out and they set up these huge spotlights that are aimed up at the mountain. And so the idea was, if the kids did get up into the mountain somehow, they would see these lights and hopefully walk down to them. After they set up the spotlights, the police began combing the side of the mountain in hopes that the kids were not abducted. But despite the spotlights and hundreds of searchers and people yelling out for these kids, they never heard back from the kids. They didn't find them. And so all night they're looking for them, and they're realizing that there's a pretty good chance they're probably not here, and that means they probably were abducted. And so by the following afternoon, things were really starting to look grim. There was no sign of these kids anywhere. And that's when a searcher who was way outside of the primary search area, they were about 3.5 miles away, thousands of feet up in elevation.
Never in the search area.
Looking around, and they're getting ready to leave when they see something out of the corner of their eye that looks like a person. They turn around, and one of the kids is poking their head up from behind a log. And the searchers run over to them, and sure enough, the 3 kids were actually inside of this downed log, and they were all okay. As the searchers are picking them up and calling this in, they're thinking to themselves, how in the world did these kids get so far away? Once the children were brought back down to the search headquarters and were
stock searcher photo,
and were checked out by a doctor who said
it usually is like the first Google image results.
After all that,
for whatever the detail
is.
Asked
them the question that everybody was thinking: how did you get where you were found? And Larry, the oldest of the group, he was 7 years old. It took him a minute, but eventually he said, you know, they were playing around the picnic area and they went just barely into the tree line when all of a sudden a bear came out from behind a tree and began chasing them. And the 3 of them ran 3.5 miles up a mountain to find this log, which they jumped inside of, and they hid inside of this log from this bear.
3.5 miles.
Patrolling the area looking for them. And
like 9 years old? It's insane.
Apparently walking around the area looking for them. Larry said they were especially scared of the gorilla that was walking around the area looking for them.
Fucking gorilla?
Now, it's easy to discount Larry and the kid's story because you could say, okay, well, the gorilla they saw was actually just a searcher looking for them. Except there was no one.
Also, they named their kid Larry. No one's ever going to believe that kid.
Until right before they were found. It was kind of like a last-ditch effort to push outside the boundaries of the main search area. It was just kind of a miracle they actually located them. And Larry and the kids were saying this gorilla and this bear were looking for them on the first day and first night they were out there. So there were no searchers out there at that time. As for the bear, there have been bear sightings in the Santa Fe ski basin, although it is fairly rare. But if it was a bear that was chasing these kids, it would have caught them. A bear is not gonna not be able to catch 3 small children running uphill. So either there wasn't a bear, or it was some other animal that might have resembled a bear. But what type of an animal would chase 3 small children who are very vulnerable 3.5 miles up a mountain only to abandon them? But even if we say, you know what, there's no way the bear and the gorilla had anything to
Seth
do with
Rogen,
this.
man.
This is just kids who got lost and they wound up in the woods and they were found, and that's it. Fine, but I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I can tell you right now, there's no way they could cover a 3.5 mile distance uphill in really rugged mountainous terrain in a 24-hour cycle. There's no way. Without help, that's not possible. I would say the only caveat to that would be if my children were fearful for their lives, in which case adrenaline would kick in and they probably could cover that distance in a 24-hour period.
I mean, if the only alternative was to get fucking torn apart by a bear, obviously they're going to book it.
For their lives. And they had that adrenaline kick, and that's how they were able to cover that distance. But were they really running from a bear or a gorilla? We don't know. And there's been no further investigation into this case. And I think that's because
where are the gorillas?
The police, they're happy, and everybody moved on.
This one's
from 2002.
This one has a sad ending.
Colin Finnerty was perhaps the most
Your GPS is wrong.
college quarterback in history, winning 3 national championships and being named the Division II Player of the Decade. He was also perhaps the toughest college quarterback in history. Most quarterbacks will spend their careers looking to avoid getting smashed by defenders. Not Colin. Colin was 6'2", 240 pounds, and he would tell his teammates that he wanted to get hit, and he would hit back. And his coaches hated it about him, but his teammates loved this about him. Colin was also famous for playing through injuries. His junior year in college, he broke his collarbone, and he didn't tell anyone, and he played through an entire playoff series that he won. After college, Colin's professional football
athletes
career
are insane.
Was not nearly as successful as his amateur one. He played briefly for 2 NFL football teams, the Baltimore Ravens and the Denver Broncos, but when he wasn't getting any playing time and he just could see the writing on the wall that this was not going to be a match, he was not going to make it in the NFL, He left for Europe to play in a European football league. But when his European football
I know a few
career
people who
started to
moved
sputter out as well around 2009
and did some like
came back
coaching
to
in
the
Europe
United
and stuff
States,
for
where
football.
He joined a very small-time indoor arena.
It's like a really like lucrative bubble
And
of
while
like
Colin's love of football was still there as much as it ever was, he knew at this point
American
at this
football
local level,
abroad.
his career was
It's kind of
effectively
interesting.
over. Around the same time that Colin was hanging up his football cleats, he would meet Jennifer, who would become
Kind of like
his
picking
wife.
up more and
She
more
was an all-state
popularity.
volleyball player, and in many ways was just as competitive and as athletic as Colin was. They were kind of like a perfect match for each other. They married in 2010, and Colin, this big man, big-time quarterback, was shaking and crying at the altar because he was so nervous and excited about marrying Jennifer.
Well, American
Because I think
football
this was
in
a really
Europe.
big turning point for him, where he was basically putting football in the past.
It's usually like
and
Eastern
starting
European,
this new
though.
life and building a family with Jennifer, and he was really excited about it.
I heard Australia
The newlywed
has like a
couple
really
moved
big
into a
American
house
football
together in
program now
Michigan, where
too.
they had 2 kids, and Colin landed a good job in medical sales, and by all accounts, Colin was just hitting his stride post-football. On Memorial Day weekend in 2013, Jennifer's family was planning this 3-day fishing trip along the Baldwin River in Michigan, and the Finnertys decided they would join them. And so Colin and his wife and kids, they rented a cabin that was going to be near the campsite that Jennifer's family was staying at, and for the entire weekend, it was just this great fishing trip where everybody had a great time, and the weather was beautiful. And on May 26th, so the last night of this 3-day fishing trip, Colin, who had recently purchased this pontoon boat that they had used for this fishing trip, he wanted to just go out one more time on his boat, this boat that he was really proud of, and fish for another 30-45 minutes before ending the weekend. So Colin put on his waders and his jacket.
Always how the
grabbed his
story
fishing pole,
starts.
and he had his family drive him to the stairs that led down to the water where his pontoon boat was. Before he walked down the steps, he turned and told his family that he'd be out for about 30 to 45 minutes.
Sure, you can link it, Black Hat. We might not check it out, but you're always welcome to link it. I might check it out later.
42 minutes later at 9:27 p.m., Jennifer receives a phone call from her husband, and she's expecting it to be the call where he says, "Okay, I'm ready to get picked up." But when she answers the phone, Colin is frantic, and he's telling her that he's being followed by 2 men in the tree line, that he's out on the water on his pontoon, but there are 2 men in the tree line that he can't see, but he can hear them, and they've been following him for some time. And before Jennifer can even get a word out, Colin says to her that he's going to beach the boat and take his clothes off, and then he hangs up. Jennifer immediately tries calling Colin back repeatedly, but he's not picking up, and so she's left feeling totally confused about what her husband has just told her. But what stood out to her was how scared he sounded on the phone, and fear was not something she typically associated with Colin.
He doesn't explain that either. Like, why did he?
He didn't get scared.
Was there like
But
actually an
him to be
explanation
that
for why they would take their
scared
clothes
sounding and
off?
to be describing people basically
His
stalking
clothes
him,
were like
she
soaked,
knew
maybe?
he was in serious trouble.
Like
So she calls
hypothermia? I don't
911,
know.
And she describes where he is in the Baldwin River, and the police take her report and say, "We'll send someone out right away." After Jennifer got off the phone with police, she called her family and told them about this really strange phone call from Colin and how she had just called the police and she didn't know what to do. And so her brother tried calling Colin, and Colin answered. And when he did, Matt said, "Hey, Colin, where are you?" And Cullen would say, "I don't know."
Yeah, that's true. It could have been like really heavy.
2 guys that are still following.
He could have had fresh
And Matt would
clothes
say,
changed
"Are you
into, but I
still
don't
on the boat? Are
understand.
you on land?" And all Cullen said is, "It's getting pretty rough out here." And they
What?
hung up. Afterwards, Matt would call Jen and he would tell her about
Getting
this
pretty
phone
rough
call
out
with
here.
Cullen, and it really didn't add any clarity to the situation. And so Jen and her family decide the best thing they can do is go to the boat ramp where Cullen had said he wanted to be picked up in hopes
Yeah,
that
I coulda- I
maybe
think it might
he
have
would
been
make his way
hypothermia.
there and they would find him. So Jennifer and her family head out to this location, and Cullen's not there. They get out, they're yelling for him. There's no sign of him, and shortly after, a police car would show up because this was one of the areas where Jennifer had said when she spoke to police that Cullen might be. And so the police officer gets out, they take an official statement from Jennifer, and at this point they file an official missing person report. Before the police began looking for Cullen, they reached out to his wireless service provider and they asked them to ping his cell phone from the tower. Any service provider has the ability to roughly triangulate the location of a cell phone based on the last few locations of the phone. The last 4 locations that the service provider pinged for Cullen were up to 4
Look at this stock
miles
photo of this
apart from each
iPhone
other,
in mud.
which
I
was
love it.
Bizarre in its own way, because the idea
That would've been a fun
very
thing to,
rugged, rough area in a
do a little
very
shoot
short
of.
amount time that Cullen had been moving 4, 5, 6, 7 miles just to get to these different points. That didn't really make sense. But also when they looked at
Computer,
these points on the
let me
map,
have a
it looked like
stock
each of them
photo
was
of a
either near
muddy
paved road,
iPhone.
or in order to get to them, you would have had to cross a paved road. And so they're thinking to themselves, why does he keep moving point to point if at any one of these locations he's near relative safety? But as strange as these 4 locations were, the police now had a really solid start.
It's like some nasty mud.
People to each of these points, and they began combing along the river where he had last been seen. And within an hour, they discovered his boat. It was a little ways down from where he had been dropped off. It was missing an oar, and it was basically beached on the side of the river. It wasn't clear if it had been intentionally beached, but Cullen wasn't in it, and when they searched around the area, they couldn't find any sign that Cullen was in the area. They were yelling for him. He wasn't yelling back. Interestingly, a man who owned property near where the pontoon boat was found reported to police hearing screaming or yelling coming from the area where the boat was found around the same time that Cullen went missing. But despite this piece of information, it didn't actually help them discover where Cullen actually went. For the next 48 hours, police and hundreds of people searched in the areas where his cell phone had pinged and along the river where his pontoon had been found, but there was no sign of him. Then, on the evening of May 28th, approximately 48 hours after Cullen had gone missing, they discovered his body. It was located less than a half mile away from a paved road.
Yeah,
situated
like I said, this one is a sad ending.
Points that the cell phone provider
try to just do the ones where they find people, but
with his right arm under his body and his left arm over
this was 1 out of 3.
Some grass. When they rolled him over, he had some blood coming out of his nose, but besides that, there was no significant trauma anywhere on his body. Cullen appeared to be wearing all of his clothes.
But there's some more like strangeness to it.
On his waders was really badly twisted. Now, if he had never taken his clothes off, that would have been something he would have fixed. It would have been very uncomfortable when he started this trip to go fishing. That would have been something he would have fixed.
just wait for it. It gets weird.
He said to his wife on the phone that he was going to be taking his clothes off, which there was no explanation for that, but he clearly said that to his wife, and she reported that to police. And so some have speculated that between that phone call and finding him with the twisted strap on his waders, that indicates that perhaps his clothes did come off at some point over the past couple of days.
Nah, his arm didn't get cut off. I don't think that's what he said.
Either by him or by someone else. His cell phone had also been found in his front pocket, indicating that those cell phone pings had been his actual location. Initially, Cullen's autopsy was completely inconclusive. There was no trauma to his body.
Right, no trauma.
No obvious thing that killed him. But later on, it was determined he died of pneumonia caused by inhaling his own vomit. So we don't know how you get to a place where you're inhaling your own vomit, but I would imagine you're in a pretty panicked state of mind if that could happen to you. Many people believe Cullen's death was the result of a traumatic brain injury caused by all the years of playing football and getting hit in the head. And so that can lead to paranoia. And so perhaps this was a fit of paranoia. He got turned around, he got scared, he thought somebody was chasing him. And then, you know, he vomits and inhales his vomit, and that ultimately kills him. And in 2011, Cullen had briefly shown signs of being a little bit paranoid when one day he thought someone was following him, and he actually went to a
that's come up a lot
and said, "I think someone's following me," but he could never
for a couple
identify
stories
who this person was or who they were. But even if this was a fit of paranoia and no one was following him in the woods, well, why didn't he stop on the paved road every time he crossed it? Because that would have represented safety. I mean, in 2011, when he supposedly had another fit of paranoia, his instincts were to go to a family member and to seek help. And so you would think his instincts in this situation would be similar. He would seek help, he would seek safety, but he continuously left safety. He left the road. He left his boat. His boat was safety. Why did he leave his boat? And even if we turn this around and we say, no, it was not a fit of paranoia, that he was in fact being followed by someone or something in the woods, well, then why would that prompt him to call his wife and say,
just a really bad accident,
and take my clothes off, and then proceed to walk 4, 5, 6, 7 miles in a very short period of time, crossing over a paved road at least 1 or 2 times and not stopping, not signaling for help? That doesn't make sense either. And what was that screaming that resident heard coming from the area where the pontoon boat was found? Unfortunately, there are many questions in this case, and the vast majority of them will go unanswered. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where.
That's Mr. Ballin. Here, I'll link that video. We just watched 3 of those in a row. That was definitely like the more like spooky, like messed up one. But he did one about the Baltic Fleet before that. That was really good. Someone said there was a new nuke video. Oh, there is. All right, we want to watch some ghost sightings.
Top 5 ghosts caught on camera. Caught on CCTV. Facebook user Carly Trichler shared a very bizarre video that was recorded by her CCTV camera outside her home in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. In the video, a deer can be seen walking through her yard. But that's not all.
What? The gnome.
Bizarrely, a tiny dark little figure seems to be following the deer in the dark of night. Now, I have no idea what this little thing could be.
It does look like it's walking
footage,
on
it doesn't appear to be any kind of pet or wild animal. And whatever it is,
it's just following the deer.
It almost looks like it's walking on two legs. For now, the mysterious footage
It looks like those little baby
unsolved,
ghosts from Silent Hill in the school.
I'm very curious to hear what you guys think this little
You know what I'm talking about?
Could be.
The little like shadow ghosts.
A News Top 5 viewer who wishes to remain anonymous, let's just call him or her Alex for the sake of the video, emailed me about a CCTV recording captured at an undisclosed sleep lab during a sleep apnea test. Alex says that a coworker was monitoring a widowed female patient's sleep. And then this happened.
Let me just start recording. Oh my god.
What?
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
Alright, this is fucking weird.
Yes. It's gone now.
Now, to get a better understanding of what is going on, a bit of explanation is necessary. So the squiggly lines that can be seen at the bottom of the screen indicate that the woman has stopped breathing during her sleep. The mysterious pale figure then appears to reach out to wake the woman, after which she begins to breathe again. Alex believes the apparition might have been the patient's deceased husband, still carefully watching over her from beyond the grave. But what do you think this strange pale shape could be? Let me know down in the comments.
Yeah, that was awful.
Just start recording. Oh my god.
The ones that are, it's like someone using their mobile phone to record another monitor. It's like there's 3 pixels. We can't see anything.
It's gone now.
The end of the road. Popular Guatemalan news reporter Vivian Vasquez is driving in traffic on her way to work to report the early morning news. But she will never make it to the news station.
What?
Because Vivian herself becomes the tragic subject of the morning news when her lifeless body is discovered in a horrible car accident. Her family, co-workers, and fans are shocked and saddened
Nuke is
when they
really
hear
reaching
of
for
her
some of
sudden,
these.
tragic passing. Guatemalan traffic police show up on the scene and record footage of the wreckage as evidence. But after the video is released to the public, mourning viewers and fans all hear something in the footage that is absolutely chilling.
Who is just recording this?
Did you hear it? The anguished voice of a woman can be heard crying out in Spanish, "What did you do to me?"
It's someone talking like next to them.
When watching the footage, it becomes clear that it makes no sense for anyone present at the site of the accident to be screaming,
"This one sucks.
What did you do to me?" Vivian's loyal channel Mihaela Claudia P records a road trip through her home country of Romania and makes a stop at one of the
EVP
most
stuff
haunted
is always
forests in the world,
so
the
whack.
Hoyabaciu Forest in Transylvania.
Alright, here
Local
we go.
legends tell the story of a girl who disappeared in the woods only to reappear 5 years later with no recollection of what happened to her. Another story is that of a shepherd who, along with his sheep, completely vanished in the woods, never to be seen again. Mihaela arrives at the forest at nightfall and is all alone as she nervously makes her way through the woods. Everywhere she goes, she finds the skeletal remains of animals, but it's something else that she should be much more worried about. Mihaela might not be as alone in the woods as she thinks.
Yes, I am dead crazy to walk alone in the so-called most haunted forest in the world, and I'm very scared of wild animals. I have to admit I'm terrified, and I do not know where the exit is. Basically they told me that the legend says that a shepherd went into the forest with the sheeps and he never came out. That's the actual legend, and that's why this forest has this fame of the most haunted, because he went in and he never came back. And yes, you saw the footage with the sheep that's dead. That's a skull, a sheep skull that you saw. And if you don't believe me,
yeah,
you can
doing
check
something like this
yourself
alone
the
does seem like a
legend.
bad idea. Also, why walk in like just brush with shorts on? That seems like a bad idea. How you get all the poison ivy, the ticks.
I can hear something. Honestly, I'm terrible. What the hell is going on? Okay.
If it was a bunch of sheep, that would be pretty funny.
Mihaela begins to hear the disturbing sound of footsteps in the leaves. Someone or something is coming closer and closer. She makes a run for it and makes it safely back to her car. But did you see it? Because not long before Mihaela records the rustling sounds of someone moving through the woods, a dark figure appears to be lurking around in the trees behind her, just watching. The vlogger says she never saw anyone and has no idea who or what this creepy lurker could be. So are the stories true? Is the Hoyabachu forest in Transylvania really haunted? Or is this just some random creep stalking Mihaela through the dark, abandoned woods? You decide. You can find this video and more over on the YouTube channel Mihaela Claudia P. The Forbidden Room. Popular Japanese paranormal YouTube channel Omagatoki Film received a horrifying video from a woman who wishes to remain anonymous. They refer to her only under the alias Nakayama. Nakayama claims that her grandmother had a very strange but strict rule for anyone visiting her home: never go upstairs. Nakayama claims that she has heard creepy sounds coming from the second floor, and once saw a shadow figure quickly passing through the hallway at the top of the stairs.
Just give up the
After
second
creepy
floor to the
experience,
ghosts.
Nakayama was told the sad story of her grandmother's sister. Almost 40 years ago, the sister was living upstairs on the second floor. She was happily engaged to be married. However, the engagement was broken off by her fiancé right before the wedding. Soon after, the heartbroken woman went missing and was never seen again. Her room on the second floor has been locked and off limits ever since.
The fuck?
Nakayama is now a grown woman, and her grandmother has since passed away. As the last living relative, she now owns the property and is considering selling it. One evening, she goes to her grandmother's house. Gathering her courage, she records a video as for the first time ever, she goes up to the second floor and approaches the locked door of the forbidden room. That's when things take a truly terrifying turn.
She said don't go up there. Yeah, why at night? Respect your grandmother's wishes. What is that on the wall? She's trying to look through the frosted glass window. Sort of like no one has been in this door in 40 years. Is there gonna be a face?
The
Come
eyes
on.
of someone or something can be seen peeking out through the crack.
It's like
of
a
the locked
JPEG.
door. When paranormal investigators Hiro, Tomo, and cameraman T see the video, they are shocked.
Cameraman
They
T.
decide to visit the creepy, allegedly haunted house to investigate. With Nakayama's permission, they take the lock off the door upstairs and go inside the mysterious forbidden room. The room inside appears to be rotting, and the team finds old photos of a woman wearing a kimono. They also find some very strange objects, including a doll,
That was
covered
like a
mirror,
dirty picture
and a
at first. It's
traditional
all
Japanese
censored.
dress hanging from a cupboard. The Omagatoki team begins to get a strange, unsettling feeling that something is very off about this room.
This room is scary. There are pictures taken. They're about to get married, but they didn't, did they? Right. If the story's true.
ちょっとなさんにさ、もうちょっと詳しく聞いた方がよくないか？これちょっと異様だって。
It's too weird. It is. It's not normal. It's not. The photo was taken before the wedding, isn't it?
結婚式のそんなドレスでしょ。
Did the face just move? She just peeked at us. What the fuck? Hiro says the woman in the picture looked at him. Come on. It's like a pixel. You can't fuck with Xiaolong. He does that better. We've seen the picture moves trick a few times.
The face of a woman in one of the creepy old photos appears to move to look back at the team. The three friends are getting more and more freaked out, but they try to stay calm for the sake of their investigation. But things are about to get even scarier.
Why did that door close? Door closed by itself. Why is that? It was open. We left it open, didn't we? Yeah, we left it open. Is someone there? Is someone there? I don't think there is. I like that they have jumpsuits. Yo, if you're ghost hunting, you guys better get matching jumpsuits.
The door to the hallway suddenly slams shut even though no one is there. The Omagatoki team is a bit freaked out and feel that they should probably end their investigation very soon. But what happens next is downright chilling.
Why is it scary if there's someone outside the room? Isn't inside the room supposed to be the scary part? A human figure. Definitely someone behind the door. Hello? I'll open the door, alright? Oh. Nakayama was there? What? The woman that fucking hired us and lives in the house? This is a bizarre video. Downright chilling. Oh no. She like possessed now? There's obviously something wrong with her behavior. You've seen... You don't look well, are you okay? As I suspected, it's my grandma's fault. Look, what? What the hell is going on? All their voices got like sped up. You don't seem fine. What are you talking about? Let's go. There's something wrong. They're just ditching her there.
The three friends are baffled and shocked. They have no idea why Nakayama is suddenly acting so bizarre. The guys decide to leave, but they don't feel right about leaving Nakayama alone in the house. So they return to the home. But when they go back inside, they discover that Nakayama has disappeared. After a little discussion, Investigator Tomo feels confident enough to do a solo investigation inside the forbidden room all alone. Hiro and cameraman T wait downstairs as Tomo stays behind with nothing but a camera. It did not go well.
Right now, next to me, there's a big cupboard. Inside this cupboard, there's someone. Just earlier, you can hear someone mumbling. Is she in the fucking in the closet? Cupboard? From this crack, someone's watching me. Okay. We received a phone call. In the cupboard. There's nobody in there.
A horrified Tomo begins to see movement inside a nearby cupboard and calls for his friends. Hiro and cameraman T hurry upstairs, and together they open the door, but no one inside.
Cameraman
The
T
team has finally just had enough, and they get out of there. After this investigation, the team says that they have made multiple attempts to reach out to the woman, Nakayama, but they haven't heard from her since. So just what is going on inside this creepy house, in this creepy forbidden room?
That was dumb.
You
That
decide.
face. Come on.
You can watch this full 2-part series with English subtitles over on the YouTube channel, Omagatoki Film.
I don't know. That might be a cool channel to check out. It's like just cheesy enough.
Meanwhile,
He's no
on
Xiaolong
TikTok,
outdoor, but
TikTok user Ashley Rain has only ever posted videos of her family and all of their cute cats. But this next video is completely different from
Is that like a
anything she
huge
has
black
ever
eye in
posted
one of those
before.
pictures?
Ashley claims that late one night their motion-activated security camera caught something truly bizarre.
what? I can't even tell what it is. Oh, it's like a person. What? They jump out the window? Yeah, we can barely see like the cat in the
One of
foreground.
Ashley's cats seems to be staring at a bizarre translucent apparition with glowing eyes that appears to be staring right back at the cat. At first glance, it just looks like the cat's owner playing peekaboo. But then the pale figure suddenly just floats up toward the ceiling before vanishing into thin air. Curious TikTok commenters
it could be like
Ashley's
an open
cat might have
window.
been trying to protect the home from an unwanted dark entity.
And then there's like a
Ashley says that
breeze,
the family
maybe
has
some
since
towel or
moved to a
something's
new
getting
home
moved around.
and is happy to be out of their
Really
old
tell.
house for good. But is it real, or is it all just an elaborate hoax?
yes.
You decide.
Or not even. Just a fucking weird video.
Simon Lockhart is a security guard at a hotel in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. Simon sent me an email in which he says
Hey,
that a few
Peter.
months ago, a man tragically lost his life at the hotel. He says that ever since, he has been experiencing strange supernatural events during his security shifts. As the paranormal activity intensified, Simon began to record evidence and post it to TikTok.
So I'm in the bathroom right now. I'm not going to the bathroom if you're wondering. But I'm hearing like shuffling sounds outside the door.
I wonder how long you get to keep your job after
And
like
with the camera.
something like this gets posted on the internet.
Bro, what the f was that? No.
You're the security guard,
Then,
man.
only 2 weeks later, this happens.
I swear to God, I heard like a woman talking in here.
The boss is like, Johnson, we've had 3 break-ins on the past few shifts you've done.
I swear to God, I heard a woman talking.
What have you been doing?
What the
I don't know, man.
Oh, no. No, I'm not doing that.
But before long, the loud bangs and unexplained voices turn into something much more sinister.
I mean, I think it'd be fun to be a security guard and do stuff like this, but I don't think I would post it on the internet, like with my uniform on and shit. I would probably try to hide,
Hello?
like, who I was working for.
Oh my God. What the f? Bro.
Was someone going up the
Holy-
stairs?
No.
Simon records as something that he can't see seems to charge up the staircase right at him. But did you see it? Simon's concerned TikTok viewers point out something that he missed in his original video. Something downright chilling. Watch again.
Oh my God. What the f? What the f? Bro.
Uh-oh.
It
got a
looks
red
as if
circle.
a face can be seen watching him through the
No.
window of a door on
Come
the 8th
on.
floor.
No, what
The
is
security
face
guard
is that?
says that there was no one around and he
Like a
didn't
skeleton.
see anyone at the window at the time. He only noticed it after TikTok viewers pointed it out. Over the course of several months, Simon continues to record everything he experiences. Then late one night, the security guard is sent out to the hotel's restaurant after reports of some very unusual activity. It really did not go well.
I'm over at the restaurant right now that's connected to our hotel. The door's been wide open. And they said they've seen lights going on and off in here.
So you're climbing up with your
The attic
camera in
area.
one hand. Come on, man.
Very, very narrow stairs, and I just smashed my head on this freaking pipe.
Oh, it's not like a cat. Sounds like a bag. Oh, it's a snow shovel.
Hello? Oh my God. There's no one here. There's no one here. I'm Nope. Nope. Okay. Okay. I'm out. I'm out. Okay. Just leave me alone.
The nervous security guard hears someone say the words, "Get out," and soon after feels something or someone pull at his shirt. In a panic, Simon tries to descend the steep staircase as fast as he can, but he actually slips and breaks his ankle.
Jesus, man!
As always, whether it's all real or not, I leave it to you.
I can't help but wonder if he didn't have his fucking camera
best
out,
wishes
he wouldn't
to
have fallen.
Simon for his speedy recovery, and you can follow his story over on his TikTok page. It's Simon.
The fucking Winnie the Pooh.
Thanks for watching. Check out some weird stuff and extra clips over on my Instagram.
Check out his Instagram. It's just Winnie the Pooh dancing. All right, Simon. All right, there's a link to that. That's Nuke's top 5. Let's watch an outdoor shot long. Terrible hospital, terrible ghost.
今天感觉可以，这地方。
I feel fine today.
还没看到这个呢，瞅这个地方。
Look at this place.
它是周围都比较亮，我感觉，但是在医院里头，它咋整它也不亮堂啊，瞅都吓人。啊，他说这个今天这地方亮堂，好，这一天可以。
It doesn't sound like Xiaolong. I can't tell. Lately, I haven't been able to really tell. His voice sounds different.
今天亮堂，吓不吓人？这玩意儿谁能预料到啊？我从来没给你来过医院，这是头一回我来。哦，医院我没去过。
It's an abandoned hospital, I guess.
太大了，这个。
This is too big. This. The videos with just his buddies are not usually as good, though. The one guy just burps and like farts the whole time. It's like, what is this guy doing? Welded. Damn. They all welded to death? Hey, there are walking stairs. Nope, it's welded. It's all welded. Don't let people in. Analysis center. Why is this dress running high? Kind of. Xiaolong Outdoor is the ghost hunter, Chinese ghost hunter. But they're like funny. They put a lot of effects in their things too. There's a mattress. They're homeless people? This is a pillow. I think someone's here. Scares me. Someone's staying here this summer, right? I thought someone. I'm almost scared to death. About neurology and a neurology. Neurology ward. What do you mean by that? Neurology is your department of nerve internal pain. Don't you look at the environment? Reach out and pull. It's being blocked down there. Debris in the way. Hey, you go in first. I'll keep an eye on you. Come in. Oh, I go. This is Xiao Xin's first hospital adventure with me. This is too scary. So it's Shaoxin. I don't know if it's Xiaolong too, though. Blood collection and urine cup. Don't touch those. Those should be the instruments for collecting blood. Oxygen bag. Spare liquid. Long hair. Medical garbage. All. Ouch. A bit like a crematorium. Otanima. Why are some of them welded and some of them not? Do you think you can open it? Probably a good reason. There is light. Oh, little transition there. All the doors here are welded to death. Probably like some kind of like medical waste. Probably why you can't go in there, dude. I don't know if I'd want to walk around like a hospital like that, though. Shit on the floor, like needles or something. Accessible in here. And what's that there? Ah! Who? Don't move, don't move. Somebody? I don't feel right. Everything else is welded to death. There's none here. None here. Yo, Imaginary. Thank you for that 15 months, dude. Appreciate the support. Oh, Rick. Why is there such a big hole in the wall? Fucking hallway. What's the green? Just paint? This place is scary. Is this a rolling door? Nurse's station. Ouch! What are you fucking stepping glass? Jesus Christ. It fell. We go out one by one. Follow me. What was falling on them? The fuck? The roof of the shed fell off.
哎呦我操！
Ouch! Ouch!
哎呦我操你妈的！这进去看来。
Go in here and have a look. Don't get lost. Said don't get lost. This should be a hanging shed. Every room is like this. This room is even scarier. This is really like a morning hall. Oh no.
衣帽间儿。谁呀？谁？
Who?
操你妈！出来！操你妈！吓他我一跳！出来！
Made me jump. Come out.
这他妈也太准时了。
This is too punctual. Whatever that means.
操你干嘛呀？操我！这干啥呀？正好11点。谁呀？
Exactly 11 o'clock.
开玩笑，你说一声。
It's a joke. Tell me.
出来。
I'm out.
窗外边，来灯闭了。那外边应该是大马道。哪挤不到吗？
You're gonna go. What even is it?
我操你妈！
I'll be right back.
我操！哎我操！我操！我操！小心！哎呦！你干啥呢？我操！ 哎呀！啊！我操你妈你！
Yo, Lutrum. Thank you for gifting a sub.
我操你妈的！那前面那玩意儿，兄弟们，你赶紧去给我卖放下，看那是啥鸡玩意儿。
Do a slow motion.
我怎么感觉像个东西扑了过来似的？去你妈！大白雾飞下来了。你脸色那么好啊？白色的还是空气？啊？你脸色这么好？
Why do you look so bad?
像个被白被单被风鼓起来了似的。我操你妈的！我喘不上气儿。哪有纸人啊？
There are no paper men.
像纸扎人一样。两个男的，武器像纸人。啥？ 哪有纸人啊？
上水里来，来！操你妈的！
啥纸人啊
What paper man? Are they talking about the guys that they were like lighting in fire?
哪有纸人啊？
哎呦我操你妈呀！哎呦我的妈呀！
啥呀？
这地方
Hey, my mama.
真玩不了。
哎呦我操！
这地方玩不了，真玩不了。
说这是魂儿吧？
你拿着来。
我去你妈逼的，俩头人呢？这两边亮光是啥呀？
俩人儿压根儿就那光是反的，这俩玩意儿绝对是人。
俩人啊？
俩纸人。
Oh, I see.
曝光出来的这是。
这是还是咱俩那个
when I was like a teenager,
那边啊
went like ghost hunting a few times, I think.
妈的！哎呦我的妈！哎呦我操你妈！这真是俩人，俩纸扎。
回去走吧，这也太鸡巴吓人了，这地方。
This place is too scary.
那是反光。咋整啊？跟着我行，我后边。
我不敢去。
你跟着我就行。
都鸡巴看着东西了，我还去啊？
咱瞅着啥玩意儿了没？瞅一眼，咱马上就撤。
咱俩能看着，刚才我都看着了，指定是不让咱俩看着。
把黑屏了。 带一本，走，跟着我，在后边。走。
How was that? 进来 Get in. Get in. Below them, a white man. Theodab's drifted by. Fuck your mother's drifted by. Come out. Always like someone. Shouty Mouse. I like that it's plural now. Yeah, also Xiaolong's phone seems like it's like Nokia phone. But I think that's like half the point. That it's on like crappy camera kinda. It obscures things and makes it easier to put special effects in occasionally. Get down. A particularly pronounced cough.
我操你妈！ 操你妈了这！
Jesus. A cat? Is it a fox? What is that? One more. Oh yeah, the cats. Where are they going? Brother Long, there's something wrong with this place. There's a really clear. Are you listening? Yep. What happened to those cats? Still not leaving. Where is it? There. You can't hear it? It's so loud. Is it person? What the fuck?
What?
Yeah, I love that channel. Yeah, what the hell was that? It's like someone turned the lights on or something? I don't know why that scared them so much. Yeah, but did someone just turn the lights on in there, maybe? Is my question. You know, we watched the first part of this. Watch the second part.
Welcome back to Curious Archive. This video is the second half of a series exploring the biology and ecosystems of realistic Pokemon. The Realistic Pokemon Art project was created by the talented RJ Palmer, aka Arvelous, and I have links below where you can follow and support his work. This second round of redesigns features amazing biological details and an even wider variety of Pokemon. But please remember the disclaimer from the first video. These realistic life forms are an exciting speculative exercise, but not an attempt to somehow improve the stylized designs of the original games. They're just fun alternate takes that imagine Pokemon in something closer to real-world anatomy. Although of course these life forms are more fantastical than what would likely appear in nature. With that said, let's jump into part 2 of our nature documentary of Another World, and return to the astonishing domain of realistic Pokemon.
He's a pretty cool artist, Palmer.
Beginning with Gen 2 starters, we have Meganium and its pre-evolutions. The designs of these creatures take inspiration from sauropods, but also from modern tortoises. And while tortoises have evolved to eat grasses, Palmer imagines the long necks of Meganium help them reach their preferred food of treetop fungi. And speaking of fungi, the antennae at the end of Meganium's nostrils are actually a unique strain of fungi, which Palmer states the Titans have a symbiotic relationship with, although the exact purpose of this is unknown. The flower-like structure on the front of their shell is not a plant, however, but a brightly colored frill that mimics flower petals. This might seem strange, but animals camouflaging themselves as plants has been documented numerous times in nature, like insects whose wings have evolved to resemble leaves. Up next, we have Typhlosion and its pre-evolutions, reimagined with greater detail and anatomical plausibility. In its claws and fur pattern, this reimagining resembles a cross between some sort of badger and a sun bear. Palmer imagines Typhlosion feeds primarily on comb bee hives, and the wax from the hives has a chemical reaction with Typhlosion saliva to create a flammable substance. Typhlosions then use their tongues to coat their quills in this chemical, and then light them on fire using specialized flint-like teeth. The blazing quills are an intimidating display and can burn for long periods thanks to Typhlosion's fire-resistant coat. A really original explanation. And the last starter from the Hoenn region is Feraligatr and its pre-evolutions, rendered in all their reptilian glory. Not surprisingly, Feraligatr is most analogous to Earth alligators or crocodiles. Palmer imagines this life form as a large, opportunistic carnivore, lurking in coastal estuaries and frequently traveling between salt and freshwater habitats. I'd probably watch my step near rivers with these giants around. Moving beyond Generation 2, we have the incredible desert-dwelling Flygon. Palmer envisions that this swift aerial life form possesses a
I don't even know what the fuck
bladder
Flygon
that helps
is.
the large organism achieve flight. Flygons skim the surface of the desert, looking out from behind a red transparent membrane which protects their eyes from the sands. And on the sands, near some other interesting desert fauna I'll let you classify on your own, we can find a trapinch and a vibrava, both reimagined to look like they could more feasibly be early stages in a Flygon's life cycle. In this alternative world, millions of years ago, large prehistoric Pokemon stomped across the land, now known to scientists in the form of fossils. Taking inspiration from the games, Palmer imagines recent technology has revived these long-extinct species, like the mighty Tyrantum and the lumbering Bastiodon, pictured here locked in combat, in poses reminiscent of classic dinosaur
I know
art.
that picture.
Not surprisingly, Palmer has based his Tyrantum off the T-Rex, and has imagined its beard as a scaly,
it looks like a
soft
Monster
tissue
Hunter
pouch
monster
that could
too.
flare out to intimidate rivals. It's exciting to imagine these creatures living in the primordial landscape of the Pokemon world 100 million years ago. It almost makes me want to visit a Pokemon museum of natural history. Another fossil Pokemon you might find at such a museum is that of Aerodactyl. Now resurrected as living creatures, the Aerodactyl are now known by Pokemon scientists to be a vibrant shade of purple and to possess early protofeathers on their necks. Elsewhere in this image, one can also spot an Archen and a Cranidos, further fleshing out the world of prehistoric Pokemon. Deep in the midst of a past ice age, the mighty legendary Pokemon Kyurem reigned supreme.
Yeah, I don't know who any of these
Palmer
Pokemon
has
are.
redesigned the stylized armor of the original as more biological plating.
Well, I know
The
who
Kyurem
Aerodactyl
was a
is,
creature
but
of almost insurmountable power. The legendary
So it may
beast
as well just be a
Raichu,
Monster Hunter
imagined
monster.
here as a Smilodon-like Ice Age hunter, would sometimes take the risk and try to ambush this titan. Though a bite of a Raichu could take out most Pokemon, Palmer imagines
Those
it
things
has
look
less
awesome.
effect on Piloswines, depicted in this image as Ice Age megafauna with coats so thick they provide a natural defense from the teeth of whatever else might be stalking the tundra. In modern polar and mountainous biomes, one might find the elusive Abomasnow, portrayed as a curious, heavily furred biped that Palmer imagines were unknown to
It's like a
Pokemon
Yeti.
scientists until the turn of the century, when a specimen was at last documented. Sharing the frigid biosphere with these seldom glimpsed
Bird
creatures
Yeti.
are the elk-like Pokemon Winter Sawsbucks and the penguin-like Delibird. Another lifeform in this image
my
is
God.
the infamous Mr. Mime, reimagined as
funny.
a species somewhere between a frog and an axolotl. And honestly, I find this redesign a bit nicer to look at than the original. Looking in the cave
Yeah,
systems,
honestly.
one can find Noivern, a species that is a dragon type in the games, but Palmer has reconceptualized as a creature more closely related to bat Pokemon like Swoobats. A single Noivern can claim miles of cave systems as their territory, scaring off competitors with booming sonic frequencies. Swoobats are their smaller cousins, and look much closer to a traditional bat here on Earth. And if you look closely, you can see Joltix clinging to the fur of these species. Palmer imagines these small arachnid Pokemon can create static charges by nestling into the fur of other fluffy Pokemon. Pretty creative. One massive Pokemon Palmer redesigned is Onix and its evolution Steelix.
Like
Instead
Dune.
of being made of literal rock, Onix is depicted as a massive serpentine lifeform with rock-like scales. Likewise, a Steelix isn't fully metallic. Instead, exposure to its natural environment transforms its scales into shiny, metallic-looking armor. This process almost reminds me of a scaly-foot snail, a type of marine gastropod that incorporates iron sulfide into protective scales on its body, almost like a natural suit of medieval armor. I could see Steelix perhaps undergoing a similar process to form its own protective scales. And holding on to dear life at the end of these creatures' tails, you can perhaps spy a Sableye, reimagined not as a ghost, but as a tiny primate with strange eyes similar to a Tazier. Palmer describes this species as attracted to shiny objects, which unfortunately for this Sableye included the metallic scales of a Steelix. Under the waves, the aquatic leviathan Gyarados takes on the role of apex predator in almost any aquatic ecosystem they inhabit. This creature recalls the appearance of a deep-sea oarfish, which can grow up to 26 feet or 8 meters in length.
Oarfish don't actually like attack people though, right?
But still pretty incredible.
Kind of like
Palmer imagines
do their own
the
thing.
marine biologists of this world for decades didn't realize the comparatively tiny Magikarp were early forms of Gyarados, which makes sense. And nearby, a greater underwater ecosystem flourishes, including Cloyster and a Relicanth, all looking closer to the real-world animal influences.
Huh.
Returning to legendaries, we have the awe-inspiring Pokemon Zapdos, an enormous bird with an incredible electric discharge. Instead of being an elemental deity, this version of Zapdos has an extreme capacity for electricity retention.
Like the Magnevites are like crabs.
The atmosphere and gathering electricity like a living lightning rod. That's very interesting reimagining. Another electric Pokemon is Raichu, the evolution of Pikachu that also looks quite rodent-like. As you might have already spotted, this image also contains Voltorb reimagined as a Pokeball mimicking
Armadillo, I didn't even notice that.
And Magnetons as magnetic crabs with red and blue colored claws. In my opinion, truly hilarious designs for some of the most outside-the-box and challenging original Pokemon. Another ancient and seldom seen legendary is Lugia, redesigned as a life form with more streamlined aquatic features. This guardian of the seas looks like something from the Plesiosauria order, just even larger. Near Lugia are some additional underwater species like Quillfish and Seadra, all of which have far more detail.
I always thought Lugia had something to do with Luigi.
In the skies, the immense legendary Yveltal, redesigned here as an avian super predator, casts a dark shadow over most flying types whenever it comes out of its deep hibernation.
Lugia.
In designing this ancient creature, Palmer took inspiration from the late Jurassic feathered dinosaur Ichi, an animal whose wings are perhaps the closest thing nature has ever produced to a dragon's. Swooping just out of reach of Yveltal's claws are Latios and Latias. With this duo, Palmer has merged the stylized, airplane-like elements of the original designs with the anatomy of various real-life bird species, creating more plausible but still agile-looking life forms. And in the other corner of this image, you can spot a scalier-looking Salamence, whose wings, according to Palmer, are formed from membranes extended over an enlarged set of ribs. This might seem far-fetched, but real-life Draco lizards are capable of gliding flight thanks to a set of wings that are, indeed, supported by their elongated ribs, as you can see by this skeleton. And since we touched on Groudon in part 1, we have to touch on its oceanic counterpoint Kyogre, which looks downright awe-inspiring in realistic detail.
It has like fucking tentacles in it? Or it's eating a tentacruel, I see.
Between a whale and the absolute largest of marine reptiles. To capture prey, Kyogre can use a dazzling bioluminescent display to lure in smaller species like Tentacruel. Above the feeding Kyogre, a swarm
I thought the
of
tentacles were part of
fish
its
and
mouth at
jellyfish
first when I
drift
saw
by,
that.
their anatomy much closer to that of an earth jellyfish. And if you look closely, you might have spotted Sharpedo, whose stylized body has been reworked with a design that takes inspiration from
so much
sharks,
like a
of course,
sunfish,
but also
though. It really
ocean
is just a sunfish,
a
yeah.
strange and truncated looking organism. This Sharpedo is going up against the nautilus-like Amistar, another prehistoric species that was recently revived. And as our grand finale, we have the mythical and legendary Rayquaza, looking truly epic in realistic detail. This mighty serpent is exhibiting an unknown display of bioluminescence as it soars through the upper atmosphere, a sight that would be intimidating to behold.
Well, even the normal one looks like a sunfish, kind of.
Flight is unknown and would likely require a variety of specialized flight organs. Believe it or not, there is a type of snake called a paradise tree snake that can glide for brief periods by leaping off trees, holding its body flat and curving in a way which allows it to coast through the air. Rayquaza, of course, is taking this to a new level. And there's an entire aviary of flying types flocking in Rayquaza's shadow, including Pidgeot, Braviary, and others, all of whom look
Rayquaza sounds like a
birds
drink you
might
would
see
get
here on Earth. And with that, we've covered the
get some,
majority of realistic
Rayquaza?
Pokemon in the project. If you want to dive even deeper into this world, there are extra designs, including some additional legendaries, on RJ Palmer's site and in his art books, so check the links below if you're interested.
That just
For
looks
now,
cool.
this is the final part of the series, but if you enjoyed this entry, please lend your support, and like, subscribe, and hit the notification
Channels,
icon
Curious
to stay
Archive.
up to date on all things curious. See you in the
Check them out. They just do a bunch of random, completely random things. We have another one we haven't watched yet. Here's a really short one.
Sometimes you can tell if two animals are related just by looking at them. It's no surprise dogs
bring
and
'em on your
wolves
ship.
share a common ancestor,
Bring the
or
alligators
that
on
tree
the ship.
squirrels and chipmunks are in the same family. But occasionally, two different species share a relation which stretches the mind. So for this entry into the archive, let's take a look at the animals you'd never guess would show up to the same family reunion. To start off, we have rhinos and horses. Just looking at the multi-ton leathery rhino, you might sooner guess it's the cousin of the elephant or
I mean, we could ride
hippopotamus.
rhinos?
But despite appearances, horses are much closer relatives to these giants. How is this possible? Well, while the exact common ancestor of these two has yet to be found, we know both rhinos and horses are distantly related to the same small forest-dwelling predecessor called Hyracotherium. The genus lived during the Eocene period.
Yeah, they're all
I've
from,
got
like,
more on them
pachyderms,
and
right?
other tiny early mammals in another video. But today, the hulking rhino and majestic horse have clearly gone in different adaptational directions. Despite this, both species still belong to the same larger category, the odd-toed ungulates, a classification which also includes
look at that
the
guy.
tapir. That's right, there's a third branch in this family tree. The tapir is a squat, somewhat odd-looking herbivore with a short trunk like an elephant for grasping at food, despite also having little relation to actual elephants. Looking at these three side by side, they hardly look similar, but that's the funny thing about adaptation. Up next, we have seals and bears.
Huh.
The cuddly
Yeah, I
aquatic
guess.
seal might appear far off from the large
Like dogs,
terrestrial bear,
definitely.
but genetically speaking, the two mammal groups are pretty closely related. It's believed both animals share a common ancestor in the pugila, an extinct species of semi-aquatic mammal. Over the course of millions of years, some members of this ancestral species spent more and more time in the water, and became the almost fully aquatic group we now recognize as seals today. The other remained mostly on land, and became larger, heavier, and more diverse into the various modern bear species we're now familiar with. But biologically speaking, the two are still cousins. Continuing on, we have the hippopotamus and the dolphin.
That's kind of
The
weird.
four-limbed heavy-set hippo and the sleek, flippered dolphin might seem like total opposites at first glance. But like many of the other pairs on this list, they share a common ancestor. The two groups split off around 60 million years ago. And the group that eventually gave us the dolphin, the cetaceans, also includes all species of porpoises and whales, meaning the whale and hippopotamus are, incredibly, also related. What
I guess
a
it kind of makes
curious
sense.
lineage. Next, we have the elephant, which, as we've already established, isn't as closely related to other African megafauna like rhinos or hippos as you might expect. So, what are the closest living relatives of the largest land animal on planet Earth? The rock hyrax, a species of tiny rodent-like mammals, and the manatee. At the very
That
least,
makes sense.
manatees are a hefty, leathery group of
Yeah,
animals,
manatee kinda
so
looks
you
like an
can
elephant.
somewhat see how such a species might be related to the elephant. But the tiny, furry rock hyrax seems like quite the odd relative to the heaviest thing on the African savanna. Part of how we know the two species are related is the makeup of the hyrax's front teeth is actually similar to that of an elephant's tusks. Indeed, the two species only diverged around 65 million years ago, which isn't that impossibly long on an evolutionary timescale. pretty interesting. Moving on, we have the Echidna and the Platypus. While these two don't look alike, they are perhaps the most made-up seeming organisms alive today.
They're both fucking weird.
Kind of tracks they'd be related. Both groups are the only mammals currently living which lay eggs. Even stranger, however, the platypus is able to detect electric fields with its bill, and has venomous elbows. Like the platypus, the echidna can also detect electric fields through its snout, which is part of what links the two mammals to each other. What an incredible pair. Nearing the end, we have the giraffe and the pronghorn antelope. Giraffes are such unique mammals in general, with their extremely long necks and characteristic spots, that you might not assume anything, let alone an antelope, would be their relatives. And indeed, despite their name, pronghorn antelopes aren't actually antelopes at all, but an offshoot species more closely linked to the giraffe. This relation is a relatively recent scientific discovery, and frankly, it's almost nice to know that the truly unusual giraffes have a genetic relative.
Brag about it.
They might still stick out as the tallest living terrestrial animal, but as it turns out, they're not alone, biologically speaking. And at the end, we have jellyfish and coral. Since jellyfish are free-floating ethereal animals and coral are so sedentary they hardly seem like animals at all, you'd be forgiven for assuming they have nothing in common. But in fact, both jellyfish and coral are cnidarians, aquatic animals with specialized cells for capturing prey. You might not think of coral as hunting prey at all, but in fact, some species do possess stinging tentacles like jellyfish, which they use to
Isn't there like fire coral too?
Close.
If you touch
it, some coral have even
burns you like kind of like a jellyfish.
Jellyfish, which seems quite surprising. I wonder if they know their family. And that's the end of our analysis of animals you might not have known were related. If you enjoyed this,
you might not know. Again, that's Curious Archive. Just a lot of like random animal stuff, a lot of medieval stuff. You can watch most of the other ones. All right. Watch a couple more videos, probably. Maybe one or more. Atomic Shrimp has a new scam video. This might be kind of funny. How long is this? Only a few minutes.
Today's video is about a real-life scam victim who I will refer to only as H. H is 27 years old, and it all started with the search for employment.
Look at channel.
Our purpose today is not to mock or scorn this individual, but rather to look at the particular details of the scam to see what we can learn from it. To set the scene, H had been through quite a few troubles in life, including a divorce, health problems including COVID and kidney stones, and then what H describes as an illegal termination from work after taking medical leave. And the ensuing dispute over the termination resulted in months of delay in receiving unemployment payments. Of course, stories like this are sadly too common in the world in which we find ourselves, and my reason for mentioning this background will become clear later. But anyway, H did what I think is probably the right thing to do in
he does about like random food videos. He's got a bit of everything. I like his channel.
H started looking for employment and applied for this job, remote data entry specialist, that was posted on Indeed.com, which is a reputable job site. After filling in the application, there were some online assessments on the Indeed website, and then about a day later, H got a response from the supposed employer. The job posting had said they were trying to fill 10 positions in this role, so such a quick response didn't seem out of place. Things progressed quite quickly with the exchange of messages and phone calls, which all seemed to go very well, then an online interview. So, an online interview for a work-at-home role. Well, 2 or 3 years ago, all of that might have seemed really unusual, and maybe would have rung alarm bells, but now, in 2021, it's not really unusual at all. I actually know other people who've been working in their roles for months and have not yet met any of their colleagues in person. This is just a thing that happens now. Yep. Anyway, the interview all seemed to proceed in a very encouraging way, and H was feeling quite optimistic.
I'd imagine there's even more scams
After
then,
a very brief moment of consideration of H's interview responses, they offered H the job. They said there would be some work materials required for the role, a computer and some software licenses and so on, and H was to organise the procurement of these items. H asked if this was to be reimbursed afterwards. Nope, they said they would pay up front. They would send a cheque via courier. H was to present the cheque, then contact the company's authorised vendor channel for procurement of the work materials. The supposed employer did indeed send the check and it arrived the next day, just as they said.
Yeah,
And
that's
here it is.
bizarre.
H paid this check in via mobile banking on a Friday.
Bear
and
Trap
made contact with
Enterprises.
the company's authorized vendor to begin the procurement. The vendor appeared to be having some technical problems receiving payments via conventional methods and suggested payment via Apple iTunes cards. After all, the computer being procured was supposedly an Apple MacBook Pro, so that sort of made sense. The approved vendor pushed for prompt action, stating that a time-limited price deal had been struck with the employer. H finished dealing with all of the payment requests on Wednesday. Thursday morning, the check from the supposed employer bounced. The scammers broke contact. H was now significantly in the red. So, to address the pachyderm in the parlour, yes, this is a blatant scam. The rubber check is quite a common scam, especially common in the context of fake employment scams. You might be thinking this is so obvious you would have recognised it straight away. And fair enough, yeah, me too. I would have recognised it because I've seen it before. I'm aware of it. It's obvious to me not because it's fundamentally obvious in some platonic form, but because I've seen it before. H was not aware of it, and so it was not so obvious. I asked H about how this came to be. Was there not some life skills or humanities education somewhere at school or college to make H a little bit ready to resist this? But apparently no. This isn't a thing that's taught at school. I mean, I received no such teaching at school either, but for me that was quite a long time ago and we had other things to worry about, like saber-toothed cats. So H's particular journey through life had never brought about exposure to the knowledge of this specific scam. But wait, shouldn't it have been obvious just from the behaviour of the scammers, the slightly unusual nature of the job appointment, the requirement to buy your own kit,
yes,
the urgency and the weirdness of the payment?
Could have at least seemed like a fucking pyramid scheme or
yes,
something.
Those things should ring alarm bells. They really should. But here's the thing. When your head is already clanging with other alarm bells about where the next rent payment will come from, whether your previous employer will pay up the money they owe, whether your own health and well-being will crumble and fail, I happen to think it's sort of understandable that your faculties of reason, caution, and so-called common sense might not be operating at full capacity. Add to that the excitement of actually getting a job offer in the midst of a desperate search, and there's another way that critical thinking can sometimes go on the back burner. I recall myself from past experience being especially accommodating with the requests from people who just offered me a job. It's kind of what you do. Etiquette kind of requires it. I'm mentioning all of this not to make excuses for H, there's no reason to do that, but rather so we can strip away the judgy and unproductive nonsense about how smart we are for knowing this was a scam, so we can learn from it, even if that learning is a reinforcement of something we already know. H fell for the scam because of simple ignorance that this scam exists, or maybe innocence is a kinder way to phrase that, and also because of great desperation in the midst of very challenging life circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it could be more than one thing.
I asked H to write some advice for the kind of past version
of
H.
It's black and white.
About to be scammed version of H, and unsurprisingly, the answer can be summed up as, don't overextend trust, and in financial transactions, don't value expediency above security. So specifically, just because some stranger has supposedly offered you a job, you shouldn't accept them as trustworthy until and unless they have abundantly earned that trust. And on the finances, specifically, if the check had been paid in at the physical counter at the bank, it might have been rejected right there and then, and all of this would have been cut short. This is just an example, but I think it's a pertinent reminder to think about whether there's anything that we're habitually doing in our financial and online lives that places too high a value on convenience at the expense of security. Okay, in conclusion, what do we do now? Well, there are a few things. Firstly, some of you may feel empathy toward H and want to help directly. This is in no way an appeal, but if you do wish to contribute financially to H's recovery from this misfortune, there's a GoFundMe link in the video description. I'm not begging you for this, and neither is H, but from experience I know that if we didn't set this up, people would request it. So it's there, entirely at your option if you want it.
I've never seen him do a video like
Nextly,
this.
if you can't or don't want to do that,
like
fair
a person
enough, there's still a way you can help for free.
Actually getting
and that's
scammed.
To just stop for a moment and think about the people around you. Are you sure they're aware of and ready to resist the kind of scams that are waiting out there for them? Talk to your friends and family about scams, about how different scams work and the serious impact they have on their victims. Heck, even if you decide just to chat with your friends,
yeah, they should like send all the boomers to school to learn how to like not fucking
discussion, and the more people talk
get
about
caught up
this,
in
the less it will
ransomware.
happen. Finally, if you're searching for employment yourself, please be wary of this common rubber check scam. In general, an employer will not tell you to procure your own office equipment, and in rare cases where they do need you to buy kit, they will never include your own finances in the loop. They would just pay the vendor directly on account or on receipt of invoice. If they can't do that, they're not a company you want to work for. In all contexts, beware of anyone who wants to send you a large sum of money via one payment method, especially paper checks, and requires you to pay out money via a different payment method. The reciprocal part is not quite as obvious, but why would a complete stranger who's just met you and only online trust you with thousands of dollars of their money paid in advance? Always ask yourself why anyone would even need you to be in the middle of their transaction. The answer is most often because it's a scam. And even if it wasn't an outright scam, it would be money laundering. Don't go there. So I hope this was interesting. Please stay safe, and I hope to see you again soon.
Here's a link to the video. Atomic Shrimp. A lot of cool videos. A lot of like email scams that he'll reply to the scammers, and it goes on and on and on. It's pretty funny. It is pretty funny. I think I might just wrap it up there for now. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. It's getting a little late. Pretty long little stream. Thank you all for hanging out. I appreciate it. I'll be back tomorrow, most likely. If not, I'll be back the day after. Thank you for hanging out. And thank you for all the support. Like I was saying earlier, we have a little sub goal going on for the rest of the month. If you like the channel, you like hanging out here, consider it. Thank you all for hanging out and chatting. I think I'll be around tomorrow, but I'm not sure. Trying to get ready for October. Do some scary things, but we'll see. All right, everyone, have a good night. Thanks for hanging out. Here's all the socials, some YouTube VODs, Twitter, all that.